All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tuesday, July 16th regular meeting. I will have our city clerk start with our roll call.
Mayor Kelly Clark.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Karen Howe.
Here.
Councilmember Amy Lamb.
Here.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kent Treen.
Present.
Councilmember Sid Gupta.
Here.
Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Treen, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Councilmember Gupta, would you mind reading the land acknowledgement, please?
We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial.
Great, thank you. All right, next up, I will entertain a motion to approve our very special agenda for the evening.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, welcome everybody. Let me take these off so I can see you. Thank you so much for being here. I love seeing this room filled. So today, as I said, we have a very special gathering as we begin to celebrate Sammamish's 25th year anniversary, which is very exciting. So happy to be here, meet past leadership and pretty much all the special people in Sammamish that came here tonight. We hope our invited guests enjoyed their time catching up with each other, seeing each other, hopefully took some selfies. I'd also like to welcome former city elected officials and leaders here, and I was going to read your names, and if I didn't call you, please let me know so we can acknowledge you as well. So formal council members, we have Jack Berry, if you don't mind raising your arm or hand waving. Oh, I did meet you, Jack, though. I can vouch for you. You were here, yeah. Don Gerund. Woo. John James, right next door. Bob Keller. Awesome. Tom Odell. Ramiro Valderrama, right in front, yeah. Thank you, accounted for. Michelle Petiti. Awesome. Did I miss any former electeds? Awesome, okay. So previous city managers, we have Mike Wilson. And we have Ben Yazici. Yay. Did I miss any city managers? Excellent. And then past commission members, we have Larry Crandall. Okay, is there anyone else I missed? Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Next up, we have, what do we have? Okay, so over the next month, we will be sharing some of the city's milestones on our various social media platforms. I hope you're all on there and up to date with everything that we're sharing. Our lovely communications director, Angie, in the back there. Hopefully you got some photos with her. We're honoring our past while also looking forward to our continued growth and future in the city. So first, I'm going to read our Jubilee Proclamation. Whereas in 1998, voters overwhelmingly voted in favor of incorporating the city of Sammamish with 63% support, and the city of Sammamish was officially incorporated on August 31st, 1999, with approximately 28,000 residents. And the past 25 years have seen many changes in Sammamish, where the City Hall was once a storefront and a shopping center, and 228th Avenue was a two-lane road. And 25 years later, Sammamish has evolved and grown into a vibrant, diverse community, now home to more than 67,000 residents, and is consistently rated one of the safest cities in the United States. And Sammamish is a city known for its commitment to the environment and sustainability, and as a welcoming community that celebrates a significant diversity of its residents. and the City of Sammamish officials and residents celebrate and recognize those who have come before us, including the Coast Salish peoples and the Snoqualmie Indian tribe, who have reserved treaty rights to this land that makes up Sammamish. And the 25th anniversary of incorporation is a reason to unite and to celebrate as a city and recognize the many community and elected leaders who have contributed to the evolution of the city and continue to work together to forge a bright future for the next 25 years in Sammamish. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Kaylee Clark, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, do hereby proclaim August 16th, 2024, the City of Sammamish 25th Jubilee Celebration Day, and invite all residents of Sammamish to join me at the official 25th anniversary party. This was just the pre-party at Sammamish Commons on Friday, August 16th, from 5 to 9 p.m. So thank you, everybody, for being here. So next, we are going to adjourn to take a group photo outside. Is this to my left? Everyone else is right, I believe? All right, I have some fingers pointing. So if all of you could join us right outside, we're going to take a group photo together. And we will resume once we're back.
So if we can have you all slide to the back and go out the doors, out in the lobby, out to outside. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So next up, we wanted to talk about our photo contest. I'm sure many of you saw, as you were out mingling, all the photos along the wall. So we hosted a photo contest to honor our 25th year anniversary. I want to thank everyone who submitted a photo. I know our Arts Commission did a beautiful, curated piece out in the hallway. Congratulations to all the winners, and thank you all for being here. I do have, I think 6 of you are here tonight that I was going to read your name, and then we're going to have you all come up and take a photo with council. So, Shubham Garb. Thank you. Awesome. And then you can just stay up here. We're going to take a photo with all of you. Mushtaq Silat. Okay. Yeah, not Paul. Yeah. Jeez. Paul. John Chen. No. Neen Cruising. All right. Steve Baker. I know I saw you. Yay, Steve. Yeah. And at Zimba Manriquez. Awesome. And then do we have anyone else I didn't get a chance to call? Awesome. All right. Let's take a photo. Congratulations, everyone. All right. Thank you, everyone. I think we are on to normal agenda, so feel free to stay. I know you would all love to. Okay, so first up, we do have public comment. We'll start in the room before we move to online. We have Jean. So Jim? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and you'll have 3 minutes, and you should see the button for the microphone to turn it on.
Turn it on. Done. Lived in our city since 1978. My family lives on a section of the East Lake Sammamish Trail where our house is on one side of the trail, our parking lot's on the other side. We always had a direct crossing from our house to our cars, but now we're forced to travel 50 feet along the trail to get from the house to the cars. On May 27th, a woman unfamiliar with the trail was on her way to our house to pick up some baby clothes. She was hit by a bicyclist, and now more than 7 weeks later, she's still in the hospital in critical condition, and she may never fully recover. After this accident, I bought a radar gun to evaluate the speed of the bicyclist, since there's supposed to be a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. I found very few single riders riding at or below the speed limit. There was a large group from 16 to 19 miles an hour, a smaller group from 20 to 25, and some outliers going 25 to 30. The Sammamish Police Department set up a radar speed collecting box near our house, and they found that the average speed was 16 miles an hour, and this is where the maximum speed is supposed to be 15. In my online searches about multi-use trails, I found that in 2010, a woman was hit by a cyclist on the Cedar River Trail in Renton. She passed away the next day. She was 83 years old. She used the trail several times a week. Renton's response to this tragedy was to change the speed limit on the trail from 15 miles an hour to 10 miles an hour, and inside the Renton jurisdiction, and also to levy a $101 fine. I went there recently and saw that the 10-mile-an-hour speed limit signs are still up 14 years later. I also found that the city of Snoqualmie has a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit on their trails. Other jurisdictions in the country, such as Houston, San Diego, and Marin County, have adopted lower limits as well. I think that the current speed limit of 15 miles an hour, there's no way our trail will ever be safe for pedestrians, for toddlers, for other bikers. I've heard many stories from my fellow trail residents and neighbors about accidents and close calls on the trail. I haven't mentioned the e-bikes. It's real easy to get them going 20 plus miles an hour. They're not safe either. I think with the 10-mile-an-hour speed limit, most of the bikers who would want to go fast will move up to the Sammamish Parkway. Up in the Parkway, there's lanes going both directions for bikes. That's the policeman that I've been talking to said there's never been an accident up there, and those are safe. With anything greater than 10 miles an hour, the speed limit on the trail, I don't think anything will change. The Sammamish policeman I've been talking with says there's also a Sammamish ordinance that precludes them from getting a first offense and handing out a ticket. And he said he thinks that should change. I think that should change. To sum up my position, make the speed limit 10 miles an hour, levy a fine, and police the trail. And last, I want to say, I have a 2-year-old. We have to cross that trail many times a day from our house to our car. Every time we walk across the trail, I worry for his safety. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep.
Jean?
Gene Morrell, I also live on the trail. One of the things, I know a lot of you are new to this, so I'm going to focus on what's different about this section. There was a north section built 10 years ago. There's a south section opened up, I think, in about 2016 or something like that. Both of those sections have only vehicle crossings. There are no pedestrian crossings where a pedestrian goes from a parking lot or their house to their beach on the other side. So by fault, by design, the section just opened in October has multiple situations where residents are forced to cross and also cross with daily life necessities. I move my garbage 100 feet down the trail, go out of my garage, up a thing, down 100 feet, carrying 2 garbage cans. I sent each of you the video of me doing it yesterday. You can see how daunting that is to have a mixed use. I'm not a trail user in that case. I'm a homeowner moving stuff. This mixed use puts residents at risk. Jim mentioned that the woman that got hit, she had no experience with trails. She didn't know the rules. Maybe she did, I don't know, but she was hit. And I know people in my family that would be in the same situation. They don't know what to expect when they cross the trail and all of a sudden are forced to deal with bikers and the other. That's why this speed limit is significant. And the other thing is, King County, when they designed the trail, they forced many people to share crossings, okay? So they wanted one crossing to the trail or off the trail, and then you walk ways to your lot or whatever. Oh my gosh, or whatever. And I think most of the folks in Jim's area are that way, that they walk down the trail with groceries and stuff like that. In my area, I was just going through the numbers today, in a quarter-mile section, there are at least 24 homes, 25 homes in this situation, that the owners park above or their home is above, cross the trail to their beach. Guests, picnic coolers, little kids, whatever. And the county is really proud of their mixed-use trails for bikers, walkers, e-bikers, whatever. There's never a mention of residents actually using the trail for something other than a park design policy. So I really would like you to, first of all, look at my video I sent you and take this speed limit issue to heart, okay? It is a serious issue. I only been sworn at and given the finger like 3 or 4 times a week when I say speed limit, slow down, so. Okay.
Thank you. Jim Creevy.
Pardon me for reading my comments. About 2 weeks back, there was an editorial in the Seattle Times in the opinion pages that was written by a local politician. She was lauding the trail network in King County and referred to them as superhighways. She could not have been more correct. We have a super biker riding in their super clothes, riding super bikes and at super speeds on the Lake Sammamish Trail. The problem has become so serious that I'm here with others asking for your help. About 25 years back, I was asked along with 11 others to serve on the King County Advisory Group for the East Lake Sammamish Trail. We were more commonly called the CAG. As a CAG member, I took my work very seriously and attended every neighborhood and public meeting that was held. I had the opportunity to witness a number of things that have left lasting impressions. First, I recall the county officials continually promising lakeside residents that the speed limits would be monitored, and repeatedly saying the trail would only be open from dawn to dusk. Neither of those promises was fulfilled. Second, I recall King County representatives and CAG members laughing and making fun of a lakeshore owner who came to tears while speaking publicly about the potential loss of privacy and property. She was my friend, and I sat there in anger and disbelief upon hearing it. Third, I remember a couple of our own Sammamish council members characterizing shoreline property owners as anti-trail, and one especially who kept referring to us as the people down there. I am from down there, and I'm not from another planet. I've been down there for the last 58 years, and just like then, I'm still a Sammamish citizen asking my city council for some needed help. Most of all, when I think of my days with CAG, I think about the large group of Seattle area bikers who attended all of the public meetings. Well orchestrated and rehearsed, this bike club arrived early, filled in the comment sheets with their names, proceeded to give very dramatic speeches regarding their own safety and respect to one of the trail options especially. By the time locals had a chance to even speak, the press and all the important people had gone home. Never once did I hear any of these biker individuals talk about the safety of the local residents and other users of the trail. That lack of respect and arrogance shown then shows daily as cyclists stream by my home, and for that matter, all throughout King County. I challenge anyone in this room to come to my neighborhood and politely ask the bikers, e-bikers, and scooters to slow down. You'll be amazed at the response. When the last vote was taken on by the CAG in reference to the East Lake Sammamish Trail, I was the only one who voted for a narrower, soft-surfaced one, and not the proposed paved 20-foot wide highway we now have. My reasons were the same then as they are tonight. Two incidents I quickly want to cite.
Thank you.
About 3 weeks back, a large group of cyclists came by my home.
Sir, it's been 3 minutes.
Mainly alike and riding 3 and 4 abreast at excessive speed. Second, on the 4th of July, 2 ladies were leaving my home. One just missed by a large man traveling at a high speed.
Excuse me, Jim.
Darkness. No lights, no bells, no whistles, and no warning whatsoever. The time, nearly 12 midnight.
Thank you. Jeff? Just a reminder, there's a 3-minute timer, and you'll see it go red.
Got it. Hi, I'm Jeff Ryan Hartson. I've been living on the trail 38 years. Last 5 years or so, I have walked 5 miles a day on the trail. Usually for healthy reasons, and it feels a lot less healthy these days. I'm a retired certified safety professional for 25 years in a manufacturing setting, and I've done risk assessments and root cause analysis, and there's a thing called a Heinrich safety pyramid, if you're familiar with it or not, that talks about the relationship between the outcomes of increasing severity, increasing likelihood that near misses turn into injuries. And you're going to get injuries that start going up that pyramid until they get more and more serious. We've already heard some cases of that. My personal experience is I guesstimate after all that walking, 85% of the bikers do not use any form of warning, even though it's posted. A high percentage pass within arm's length, whether they need to or not, even if there's added room. I have people passing bikes going at high speed, passing between pedestrians going either way, without slowing down, without warning. And with the advent of the e-bikes, scooters, all that, it's really is getting more and more of a potential and for more and more severity. Signs, in my experience in the safety field, signs, you need signs, but there need to be more. They need to be bigger font. They need to get out there, but that's not enough. You can't, sorry. The perceptions of safe behavior vary. Bikers come down from the road so they feel safer. But they introduce the same thing they're afraid of up on the road, they introduce the same thing to the pedestrian. You can't depend on common sense. You can't depend on people to be courteous. We can't afford more patrols. Bikers is too broad a brushstroke because there are people who do it responsibly. But there are still too many who are turning a wonderful asset into an unnecessarily high risk and stressful experience for others.
Thank you. Dan?
Good evening. I'm Daniel Denton. I, with my neighbors, live in the most recently completed section of the trail. Our property is truly bisected by the trail. We have improvements on both sides. We pay taxes on the property on both sides. We have no choice but back and forth. Us, our kids, guests, workmen, deliveries, all of that stuff. And I worry for all of them. Through the permitting process, that was probably the last time I was here to talk for a couple of minutes. But I expressed my concerns about safety, the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit. It just never really seemed to be addressed. And I think it was in this very room. One evening, it was Parks gave a presentation about the trail and sort of a dog and pony show kind of thing. But when asked, not just by me, but by others about the 15-mile-an-hour speed limit and safety, they assured us that it was their experience. We had nothing to worry about, that any bicyclist that was going to go over 15 miles an hour on the East Lake Sammamish Trail wouldn't go on the trail. They'd go up on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, where they effectively could go as fast as they could pedal. Well, now the trail's complete, and now we know to a certainty that that's false. The people that want to go faster than 15 miles an hour, which is a majority of the bicyclists on the trail from the police department's own study, are going faster. They're not going up on the East Lake Sammamish Parkway. Something needs to be done. Something that particularly troubles me, and it's just I have a medical condition that has resulted in a loss of peripheral vision and almost total night blindness. Naively, I was thinking, well, I don't need to worry about night because the trail's only open during daylight hours. Now we know for certain, because the county Parks is really open about it. They want to use the trail system, including the East Lake Sammamish Trail, as an urban transportation corridor. They're open about it. They say they want commuters. That's what they want to do. And they just had the King County Council pass an ordinance that allows electrified vehicles, that allows them to keep the trail open 24 hours a day now. So my concerns for myself and for others are multiplied.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Susan Denton?
Hi, I'm Susan Denton, also living in a property that's bisected by the trail, and just here to second what my more eloquent neighbors have to say. It's really become a very dangerous situation with the bikes. We've asked for help from the county in signage and in other ways to enforce the speed limit, and there really is nothing. They provided signs in our area that say, there's one about 5 homes away from us that says, "Watch for PEDs." That sign is 5 feet away from the edge of the trail. As you can see, bicyclists, especially when they're barreling through, they're nose down. They're not going to see a sign, nor is it going to have any meaning for them by the time it gets to our home. I would just suggest that we, hopefully we'll have something more meaningful either painted on the trail, some kind of, don't think they'll allow speed bumps, rumble strips maybe, something to get the attention of these folks that there are people on the trail by necessity, even if we choose not to use it for recreational purposes. We are required to be on that trail from time to time. And my concern also recently with the advent of the motorized vehicles, the electric bikes. There's been nothing in the news when they said the electric bikes are now okay on the trails. They've never discussed the classifications of bikes that are allowed, and they are limited. And you get hit by one of those things are heavy. I mean, if you've seen those. Also, in our section of the trail, is my understanding that electric scooters are not allowed at all, and that is posted nowhere. And that's not been in any kind of the public comments that I've seen. We've seen it's a kind of a free-for-all. I mean, there's every kind of vehicle, including gas-powered vehicles, mini bikes and such on the trail. My concern in our area, there's a lot of folks that have lived here for a number of years. In our 6-home stretch, there's 5 of us that have residents that are in our 70s and 80s. And, we just don't have the resource, the reaction times that we would love to have, like we used to. But anyway, any help, I think we don't want Sammamish to be known as a very place safe to be unless you're on the trail. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert?
Hello, I'm Robert Crane. My wife and I live next to the East Lake Sammamish Trail. We love the newly completed trail. My first question is, what is the intended use of the trail? Is the intent to be multi-user friendly? Is the trail available to all that would like to use it? I'm an experienced longtime hardcore bicyclist. I know the pleasure of riding fast on a smooth surface without having to stop for traffic or stop signs. When you pick up your speed, you don't want anything that might be in your way to slow you down. That includes pedestrians or families that might be using the same trail. 2 days ago, I was walking on the trail with my 89-year-old neighbor. A bicyclist approached very fast. As he whizzed by, I asked him to slow down. He yelled back, "There is no speed limit." And I yelled back, "The speed limit is actually 15 miles per hour. His response, he gave me the middle finger. Some bikes are traveling 25 miles per hour. This is incompatible with a family use trail. We had recent visitors who intended to walk on the trail, but didn't because of their concern for their safety due to speeding bicyclists. We have a 16-year-old granddaughter who is learning to ride her bike on the trail, but is apprehensive to use the trail due to speeding bicyclists. I returned back to my first question. Who is the trail for? For the bicyclists who would like to bike fast without interruption, or for everyone, all ages, all abilities? Because right now, the speeding bicyclists are intimidating everyone else. They perceive that there are no speeding limits. In fact, there are very few speed limit signs posted. They don't even know there is a speed limit. They don't even know that they are breaking the trail use rules. The speed limit signs need to be much more obvious and much more frequent for them to even have an awareness that there is a speed limit. If King County doesn't do more safety mitigation, such as posting speed limits, there will be other serious accidents, such as the woman who was hit by the bicyclist recently with significant head injury and bleeding into her brain. Significant signage for speed limits is woefully inadequate. It is in King County's best interest to have greater public awareness of the speed limit. Please correct this situation. The speed limit should be posted very clearly and frequently along the trail. Please consider placing 15-mile-an-hour limits or less signs every half mile.
Thank you. Susan?
Hello, I'm Susan Buchanan. My husband Skip and I have 2 pieces of property that force us to walk on the trail, plus we do walk for pleasure. And if any of you have walked even a mile there, I think you know what we're talking about. We'll walk a mile a day, and they come whizzing by us, some of them very, very close, but they don't let us know they're coming. The other day, I was out there very much on my correct side of the trail, and a man came. If I had just gone like that, I would have been hit. He was that close to me. And I said, slow down, let us know you're coming. And of course, I got the usual response. Anyway, if they would just let us know they were coming, what a huge help that would be. And it's like the wild, wild west out there. We're sitting in our yard. I watched a guy essentially on a motorcycle. I bet I know he was going over 20 miles an hour. I would think more like 35, just whizzing down there. So there are no rules, there's no enforcement, and so there's no protection. What can be done for the safety of the people of Sammamish? Because a lot of, anyway, I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul?
Good evening, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. I'd like to start my comment by quickly finishing part 7 of the comment I gave last week, which is remedy false premise housing supplies with authentic housing policies and quantified housing numbers to begin to attain balanced, sustainable housing for a cycle of life and generational legacy in our city. Plus, it would add holistic, added riches well above those that our residents and city enjoy now. My comment today is about organic ketchup. Costco has this on sale. All natural, low sugar, tastes great. I, of course, am using organic ketchup to mean what are our internal needs for housing from the bottom up, and we need to catch up on those housing supplies. Each of you has a bottle afterwards. It tastes great and low sugar and cheap. It's only $2, so it's nowhere near the $25 limit on gifts. I'm also providing a 10-page document that's not the same as the last one I gave. These are marked up pages from volume 2 of key points on land use and housing. I'd like you to take a look at them and my counter narrative, which is to add optimal market rate housing. Well, organic catch-up of housing supplies basically has 5 major parts. What did King County do from 1980 to 99? What's Sammamish done from 1999 to the present? What's the current comp plan, the 20-year plan? What's up for cycle of life for those who live here? And how about generational perspective for sustainable, enduring housing legacies? To do organic catch-up on housing supplies right, we must analyze housing needs and wants in all 5 of those parts against the housing supplies that are on the ground. And to what degree should our community increase affordable housing from 175 to 500,000 and market rate housing from 500 to 1.4 million that we're woefully deficient on, and high-end condos that we don't have any of, and to what degree do we lessen additional large single-family housing? So what matters most is joy and happiness. Joy and happiness for those who get to stay in the community they love over time if they want to. Joy and happiness for the city to have the richness of a strong social fabric from letting people stay, plus the vast majority of every component that makes up the city being elevated and enriched by having optimal housing supplies that meet needs over life. Enjoy your catch-up.
Thank you. All right. Did anyone get to sign up online?
Yes, we have one pre-registered commenter. Mary Wichter.
Good evening, Council. This is Mary Wichter. I've lived in Sammamish for 24 years. In fact, I looked at my house when it was in Redmond, and when I moved in, it was in Sammamish. So congratulations on 25 years. I want to talk tonight on safety, a little bit differently than the other people, but I think all the topics brought up are very serious. The Lewis Thompson Road Tightline is a stormwater project, sidewalk project, bike lane project, widened shoulder project, and it just got approved, and it's got all the budgeting and the grant money. And the water district is also having to move their water main, which is good because it's an old asbestos concrete, and they'll either be leaving it in place or moving it. And wherever they have a connection, they're going to put in ductile iron. So I'm really glad for that. In order to prepare for all this, there's a lot of utilities in the roadway. So Puget Sound Energy has had Asplund with tree cutting to get the wires back. They've been putting in super tall utility poles, which is great because the wires will be higher. But when they do that, they have to make it go to a 1-lane road, which is okay. The problem is people don't know about the project, and people coming down are in a hurry, and they don't want to wait even for 30 seconds or a minute to go. And the flaggers are having to be really aggressive to get people to slow down. And if you've ever driven up Lewis Thompson Road or downhill, you know that there's pretty sharp curves. It's an 8% grade, but we have a lot sharper curves than Inglewood Hill Road does. So I am asking for there to be a lower speed limit. And the city actually has a precedent for this and actually an active resolution. I believe it's resolution 2023-999, which is like a subsequent one from resolution 2022-939. Both those said, hey, for safety, which is really important, and every council member that I've ever seen says safety is important, that the public works director and designee has been given the right to actually lower the speed limit during construction. So I would like to see Lewis Thompson Road put to, I'm suggesting a 25-mile-per-hour maximum speed limit all the way from East Lake Sammamish Parkway, where there is a connection to that trail, and go all the way up to 212th Avenue Southeast at the top, because if you put those signs there, people will be ready for it. And if people are told that there's a construction project that's going to go on for 2024, 2025, and maybe into 2026, they'll be more prepared for it. And once they get used to going slower, they won't be crossing over the double yellow line or trying to pass where they shouldn't be passing. And as part of my written comment, I did put in photos. There was a Jeep that veered off, went through a ditch, went over a driveway, hit a fire hydrant, and actually stopped. That would have killed a student if it was during the day and somebody was waiting at the bus stop. And that was to veer for wildlife, a deer that was crossing the road. And then a second one that happened just this last month in June, there was a box truck going up. Somebody went over that double yellow line and it made them push them into the shoulder and the guardrail. And there's big scratches. It took out 100 feet of guardrail, 16 posts, and the signs still aren't up. So I think it's really important if you could get this done. I know that it's the last meeting until I think September. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
That's all for public comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, we have our consent calendar. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
All right, moved and seconded. Any questions on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great, thank you. We do have a second proclamation, Deputy Mayor Howe, for National Night Out.
National Night Out, August 6, 2024. Whereas National Night Out is an annual community building campaign that promotes police community partnerships and neighborhood camaraderie to make our neighborhoods safer, more caring places to live. And whereas this campaign provides an opportunity to bring police and neighbors together under positive circumstances, and whereas millions of neighbors participate across thousands of communities from all 50 states, plus U.S. territories and military bases worldwide, and whereas National Night Out enhances the relationship between neighbors and law enforcement while bringing back a true sense of community and provides a great opportunity to foster trust and mutual respect. And whereas Sammamish continues to support and encourage community engagement and strong partnerships with local law enforcement to enhance the safety and quality of life for all residents. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Mayor Kaylee Clark, on behalf of the City of Sammamish, do proclaim August 6, 2024 as National Night Out in the City of Sammamish.
Great, thank you so much. And I hope everybody will join us and sign up. Okay, on to unfinished business. I don't know if the comp plan will ever finish, David, hopefully. So our introduction to the draft comprehensive plan with David, Evan, Jeff, and Tyler.
All right, good evening, Mayor, Council, thank you. Great to see everyone here this evening and celebrate the legacy of the history of the 25 years we've had and take a photo together. I'll certainly be looking at that in a few years, wondering what's going on. We are here tonight to talk first about the city's comprehensive plan. Our consultant, Jeff Arango with Framework, will be providing a presentation on the work we've done so far, the status of the plan. I did want to highlight before getting started that we are not providing you a draft for review tonight. That's not the purpose of this meeting. It's to provide a background and sort of prep you for receipt of the draft once it is out of the Planning Commission arena and ready for your review. That's not to say that it would be a good idea to get started reading it, just that we're not formally transmitting it to you at this point. I did see some public comment this evening where there was some confusion about that, so I wanted to make sure to clarify that the Planning Commission is the body that is in review of it, and it would be appropriate and appreciated that if there are comments on the draft comprehensive plan, to be sure to provide those to the Planning Commission, as the Planning Commission will take those into account when making their recommendation to the City Council, and it will give us the opportunity to make any needed amendments prior to transmitting the draft to the Council. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Great. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council members, City Manager.
City Attorney. Nice to see you all. It's been a bit of time since I've been before you, and we've been busy working on developing the comprehensive plan to this point, which is pretty exciting, and we're in the final kind of stretch, 6-month stretch, moving up to adoption. And I think, as you all know, this update cycle has really been unprecedented. The level of complexity that cities are dealing with, they have not had to encounter before. So there's been a lot of things that we've had to work through. Many of those meetings we spent with you going through all of that and getting direction that's really carried us forward to this point. Sorry. There we go. So what I'm going to be presenting tonight are the boards that we used for the open house, which was held on June 20th prior to the Planning Commission meeting. And I just like to start with a little bit of background. This effort started in earnest in 2019, working through the regional process of establishing the growth target and eventually the affordable housing allocation, which is a new part of the process this year. If you recall, we picked up from where the community visioning process left off and worked with the community and with the council and the Planning Commission to develop a community-oriented vision for the comprehensive plan that you'll see before you. It's really based on the values of people, planet, and prosperity, and these 10 big ideas that are carried forward throughout the plan. Some of the major elements that the plan includes: updated land use, future land use map. That's really the core of the plan, and there's some exciting changes that we'll go over with you tonight. The city's first climate element and climate action plan, very exciting. A new economic development element for the city, which will establish a strong policy baseline for efforts moving forward. Lots of policies and strategies specific to affordable housing and to implement the great work done as part of the Housing Diversification Toolkit. And of course, all the technical planning that goes into this to ensure that we're meeting our obligations under the Growth Management Act and under the Puget Sound Regional Council regional plan. Okay. Public engagement has been an essential part of the process and has been continuous throughout. Our work at Framework started in on the plan in 2021. We held a planning summit event in the fall that involved a multitude of events on specific topics, and we got a lot of great input. And I think there were some important themes that came out of some of that initial engagement. And some of that is summarized on the bottom left of the screen. People wanting a diverse, inclusive, safe, and welcoming community. A lot of emphasis on more housing variety, choice, and affordability. Things like workforce housing, multi-generational housing, opportunities for folks to find the housing needs that meet their current needs and lifestyle within Sammamish and not having to look outside of the community. A very strong desire for more things to do in the community, a stronger community identity, services, cultural events, and retail amenities. Always been a very strong theme in Sammamish, and it continues with this comprehensive plan update, and that's a strong connection to the natural environment. Resilient infrastructure and social networks, and reliable and safe options to drive, walk, bike, and take transit. And all of those have various influences on specific elements like the economic development element, land use, transportation, so on and so forth. So we've put a lot of effort into embedding these ideas or goals of the community into each of the elements and make sure that the vision is really strong throughout. So land use is really the foundation of the plan, and we've spent a lot of time updating the future land use map over many meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council and refinements. As you all know, Sammamish is largely a single-family residential community by land area right now, and some of the requirements in new state legislation and the updated regional plan require some changes to our land use plan in order to do that. So a couple of things I'll point out. The area in yellow, which is the traditional single-family zones, those are subject to the middle housing bill, House Bill 1110. And so we're working on associated code updates to move that forward, and we've been working with the Planning Commission on that. Another really exciting concept is the notion of establishing neighborhood centers, areas where people can walk or bike or have access to services and amenities outside of the traditional centers, which are also, very important and will be subject to some future planning efforts. A few other notable changes. We've identified some areas for future sub-area planning, Inglewood and Pine Lake specifically. Those are areas that do currently allow some measure of mixed-use development, but the standards and densities and other code pieces have not really been refreshed or aligned with an updated plan. And so the thinking is that the city would move forward with sub-area planning for those areas before it made any major changes to zoning or land use regulations. We felt like that was, we couldn't really give it the thought that it needed as part of the comprehensive plan with so many other requirements that we had to pay attention to. There's a whole piece of the numbers that is really important as part of this and to demonstrate our compliance. But a lot of the fundamentals and direction that the council gave us last year through the policy workshop and other meetings has really, I think, stayed true throughout the process. What you see on the lower left is a graphic distribution, which is, an estimate that we use for some of the transportation modeling and assumptions around growth. So you can see there that we've put most of the emphasis on the town center, some of the other mixed-use centers as well, and then the neighborhood residential zone, which is the traditional single-family zones. Okay. And then these images just kind of demonstrate types and scale of development that you might see within some of these land use categories, understanding that they allow for some variety. So the town center is planned to be the most urban part of the city, allowing traditional kind of mid-rise development that you see out there today. The neighborhood center shows some kind of smaller scale neighborhood cafe types of uses that could eventually be accommodated in some of the neighborhood centers. I'd also like to point out that the neighborhood centers are really at this point only identified conceptually on the land use map, but there will be, I think, some implementation work to figure out how that gets put into place. It could happen through a private proposal as part of a development. It could be a city-led effort to establish one. So we want to be able to account for that going forward. We've really just laid the policy foundation for that. Okay, housing is probably the most technical part of the plan update, and the reason for that is the new requirements to plan for and accommodate affordable housing and a specific number of affordable units in different categories. And so when we started the comprehensive plan process, the city really identified this early on through the urban growth capacity study that Sammamish has enough capacity for the total number of units. However, in order to be able to demonstrate that we have capacity in certain types of affordable units, we had to tinker a bit with the distribution of those units. So for example, the affordable units that are in the lower end of the income ranges would typically have to be provided in some type of multifamily housing. And so we had to make sure we had sufficient capacity in the right buckets. We've put forth, I think, some pretty exciting strategies to help to deliver that. Part of that effort is happening in the town center plan, which I'll talk about after this agenda item. But there are some others, concept that we've introduced as bonus parcels, but it's really essentially a density bonus that has been authorized in state law to allow affordable housing on religious-owned parcels, which we've also extended to some publicly owned parcels, and can provide a range of affordable housing everywhere from workforce, which is sort of the higher end, down to permanently supportive housing at the lower end of the spectrum. Okay, so we are in the midst of starting the review with King County, which is new, the affordable housing group over there, and we had an intake meeting with them recently and have been staying in contact as we work through these issues, and I feel confident we're in a really good place with that review, and we look forward to getting their feedback. Okay, transportation element. This is an evolving element and an opportunity to consolidate our transportation planning in one location. The city is working on the transportation element, which includes updated analysis of street level of service and other transportation modeling associated with accommodating transportation for the land use plan. The city is anticipating to make another update to this again next year. That would also include a multimodal plan for the city, as well as refinements for strategies related to vehicle miles traveled reductions, which is a core goal of the climate action plan. Parks and recreation continue to be a very strong priority for the community and a major asset for the community. I was actually just talking to a friend of my son's father who was saying that he used to live in Sammamish, and immediately he started talking about the parks and the trails and how great they were. And, that was interesting to just see kind of his initial, what initially came to mind when he was describing Sammamish. So a lot of the efforts as part of the parks element really come from the PROS plan, which was updated recently and is something that's required to be able to get funding through the RCO. This will include an updated 6-year capital list, which will also be included in the capital facilities element, and of which we need to demonstrate the ability to fund through the financing plan. There are definitely some connections to the climate change element and sort of the goals around preservation and connection to the natural environment. This will also provide a foundation for updates to the park impact fees. And you'll see from this map here in the upper part of the board the important issue of park access. So not just looking at how many acres of parkland per 1,000 residents, which is a pretty common metric, but actually looking at access to parks and in proximity to residences and neighborhoods. Economic development, this is a new element for the city and really is intended to lay the policy foundation kind of as a first step, since this is a new effort for the city. It has the potential, I think, to build momentum over time. Some of the themes or things that we looked at as part of this effort is the issue of inflow and outflow of workers. 30,000 people leave Sammamish each day to work, which has implications, of course, for transportation and some of the other elements, but about 6,000 people commute into the city. And so the notion of being able to provide more workforce housing and more opportunities to live and work in Sammamish is a goal. We also looked at some analysis related to fiscal sustainability and the relationship between development intensity or densities and fiscal sustainability. And this is a metric that's used by a number of kind of planning organizations. A group called Urban 3, I think, founded it, but it's basically looking at land value per acre as opposed to total value. If you look at total value, things like big box stores will look extremely valuable from a tax base, but if you look at it on a per acre basis, the story tends to look different. If you're looking at the spiky parts of the map, that's, again, not buildings. Those are just indicating areas where the land values are high, indicating a stronger ability to be able to fund infrastructure and services. What stands out in Sammamish is the amount of green area, which is residential, which makes sense. And then the small kind of red areas indicate relatively low amounts of land and relatively low values compared to some of the neighbors. So I think this is something that's intended to kind of inform not only economic development, but city policy going forward regarding fiscal matters. Capital facilities and utilities. So we are going to be combining capital facilities and utilities into one element, which makes a lot of sense from an efficiency standpoint, and the issues are obviously highly related. This is where the city has some policy choices in terms of establishing the level of service, which is something that we would be planning for. And that is a lever that the city can pull up or down depending on the identified community needs. So, for example, you'll see one of the most prescriptive metrics, that's actually a calculation, is there under local parks, 9.9 acres of parkland per 1,000 residents. Some of the other level of service metrics tend to be more qualitative, and there are some new requirements like developing a multimodal level of service for transportation as opposed to just looking at the flow of vehicles. We're required to have a 6-year capital facility plan in support of the land use plan for all of those elements that include capital facilities. We need a 6-year capital facility list, identified funding sources, and the ability to fund it. And then we can also have a 20-year capital plan, which can be more general and does not need the same level of detail around financing going forward. And so I think that's kind of the highlights there. We're continuing to move through this element in collaboration with planning and public works and transportation and parks. So climate change and resiliency, this really flows from the city's first climate action plan. And there are kind of 4 main goals, which I'll highlight: reduce per capita vehicle miles traveled, support renewable energy initiatives, partner with water providers to promote municipal water reduction, and support and promote all hazard preparedness efforts. I'd like to call attention to a couple of pieces in the middle of the chart. There's a vehicle miles traveled reduction goal of 30% by 2030 and 50% by 2050. I think some of the big drivers of that are going to be from the land use plan. And if you look at the map in the middle, I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this, but this came out of some research that was, I believe, done by Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley, and was presented in the New York Times with this interactive mapping tool. And essentially what it is mapping the per capita climate impacts of each community or portions of a community. The green indicates lower impacts, and the orange and darker colors indicate higher impacts. 2 of the things that they identified, and we haven't done an extensive review of the model used to develop this, but for what it's worth, a couple of the takeaways are the correlation between climate impacts and walkability and density, as well as the correlation with wealth. And I think one of the interesting things is that when you look even in New York City with extreme wealth, it's still bright green for the most part. And so I think there's a real opportunity for the city to really consider the climate goals, the land use plan, and the issue of fiscal sustainability, because there's an intersection there, I think, of some of these concepts that could really help to move the needle on some of these goals that the city has. So I just wanted to point that out. I think that's kind of it on that. And a lot of great work that came out of the CAP and is reflected here in this element. And then finally, just want to touch on the code updates where some of this will get operationalized. And there are a number of code requirements outside of the major bills, like the middle housing bill and the ADU bill, that we also have to address and are working through. But just to highlight a couple things, one, the middle housing bill will apply to all traditionally single-family neighborhoods. Sammamish is a Tier 2 city, so it's required to allow 2 units on every lot, or 4 if one of those units is affordable. However, under the ADU bill, cities are required to allow up to 2 ADUs, along with a single-family dwelling for a total of 3 units. Those units that are ADUs can now be sold or condominiumized through a couple of different approaches to shared ownership. So that'll essentially establish a 3-unit minimum per lot for all of those single-family zones, and we look forward to bringing this topic back to you. We did, of course, move forward with all of the direction and input that we got from the council at some of our previous sequence of meetings that we had on this topic. So we are having a couple of workshops a workshop coming up with the Planning Commission, and then doing the hearing later in the summer before this will move on to the City Council. And that's the conclusion of my presentation.
I'll just add in closing that the Planning Commission is currently in review of Volume 2. They are considering, and they've been providing quite a thorough review. We've been receiving lots of comments through the Convio platform. We'll be taking it to them for public hearing on July 25th, where they will consider version 2 or version 3? Version 3, excuse me. So we're making edits currently. We'll be issuing a version 3, which I think we just actually got a copy of that. So we'll be pushing that out here later this week.
With the packet on Friday.
With the packet on Friday to go to Planning Commission. And at that point, they'll be making recommendation on version 3 and any proposed edits or changes that would go along with that. And after we receive recommendation from the Planning Commission, we'll go ahead and transmit the recommendation to the council so that you can then begin review of it over the summer and have some lead time running up to these September meetings that we'll be having on this topic. We want to make sure you have adequate time to review the commission's recommendation and the draft. There's a lot of information there, and that would be a good quiet time for you to do so.
Great, thank you. Council, do you have any questions? Councilmember O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mayor. David, I just had a quick question about the future land use map and that being a new element for us. And there's one designation in there, urban residential, I think it is, and I think that's a new one for us. How do we decide what designations to put into a future land use map? And then my second kind of follow-up with that would be, if we had, for example, like a faith-based organization who may be in a neighborhood residential zoning area and they wanted to do like a housing project on some of their land that they no longer use or want to use it differently, there's nothing in our future land use map that would prevent that from happening, or would we have to change a designation to allow that happen? So I just was interested in that topic.
I'll take a crack at answering that, and Jeff can fill in where I might have missed something. So generally speaking, we set out to not change the zoning of the city. That was not a task we wanted to take on. Instead, we wanted to look at what the future of the city might bring. So we looked at the existing zoning that's on the ground today, and we identified that we currently have logically single-family zoning, which ranges from R1 on the low end in density to R8 on the high end in density. And R8 really is bordering multifamily, but it still fits in single-family. And we took all of the zones that were in R1 to R8 and put them in neighborhood residential.
Okay.
And what that does is we're also creating a code amendment. We're redoing our rezoning process, and it would allow someone to rezone their property without having to do a comprehensive plan amendment as well. If you recall, the Santoni rezone took quite some time. They had to go through a two-step process. What this does is it allows somebody to rezone their property if it's in the right location, if the property has the right characteristics, and if it has the right level of services already provided or that will be provided before development was to take effect. So we're working on that criteria-based rezone. Okay. So in theory, if you were saying in R4, you could then rezone to an R8 if you were next to an arterial and a transit route and you had water and sewer service and your property was flat and could be developed appropriately, then you could rezone. And it'd be a much faster process to allow for that to happen. We chose the neighborhood residential or urban residential land use designation based on the R12 and R18 zoning that exists in the city. And we've been talking about upping that to a higher potential density, but we're also not making any on the ground zoning map changes, right? So that would come in time down the road, and it would allow some properties that are already zoned in multifamily to maybe take a higher density and add some units to their campuses where there might be adequate capacity for them to do so. Okay. Some redevelopment, if you will. Okay. We then identified the balance of the commercial districts that are in the future land use map based on what was there in existence today. Then we overlaid on top of that where we think there would be appropriate, logical neighborhood centers and where there would be appropriate logical sub areas that kind of are primed for redevelopment. We have a lot of existing impervious, and we might see those easily take higher density than currently the R18 that they're slated to take. So that was the work that we did. Now keep in mind that when we set about working on the comp plan in order to reach our growth target of 2,100 units, we didn't need to make any changes to zoning because we have adequate capacity to accommodate our growth target without making any changes to zoning or future land use map. We didn't have to do that. We did it because we want to actually be forward focused and think about the future of the city and where things should go. We haven't done that with past comprehensive plans, and I would argue we should have done that. So the one other thing I want to point out is that, and Jeff hit on this, is that we did identify that we did not have adequate capacity for our affordable housing allocation of 2,100 units. So we're creating an overlay, we're calling it the bonus parcels overlay. And what that does is it reallocates some of that density to properties that might actually reasonably develop with affordable housing, faith-based properties, publicly owned properties, and we're able to find capacity to demonstrate that we're planning for and accommodating our affordable housing allocation. So we are making some changes there, and there will be some zoning that will go along with that under the affordable housing, or excuse me, the bonus parcels overlay. So we'll be looking at an enhancement to the zoning that's on the ground. There's an overlay on top of that that allows for additional density, additional lot coverage, additional height when certain conditions are met. Okay. So that really is the gist of how the future land use map works, and the process by which to really actualize that down the road comes through rezoning or through utilization of some of the zoning controls that will be adopted with the overlay.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, David, for that. And just by way of a comment, I really liked that you guys put on the packet the for the comprehensive plan periodic update, the project meeting history, and able to go down through and see the succession of all the meetings, and then there's links to all the agendas and to the meetings. So thank you very much. That I will be getting into that. So that was really, really helpful, and a very helpful tool. So thank you, Evan.
One of the things we're hopeful to thread into the comp plan in the background element is a history and a story about how we developed this comp plan. It's one thing we find lacking with our current comp plan is we often, and many members of the public, developers, citizens, don't understand how we got to those numbers and what it means and what work went into it. So we're being very careful to tell that story with this plan.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all the work here. I know it's an incredibly heavy lift, and I love what you're saying about that context. I kind of liken it to, when you get a new manager at work, and they come in and, their job is to kind of question things, and having that context helps because, sometimes when they ask you the questions, you're like, yeah, you're right. We picked the dumbest way to do it. That's how we got here, right? I mean, generally we end up in places not because bad decisions were made, but it's sort of a series of events that kind of lead you into a particular place. So I think that context is really helpful. I also wanted to thank you for kind of talking about, because I think it's really critical, that intersection of land use, the environment, and fiscal sustainability. And I'd even overlay on top of that kind of the overall goal, if you will, of everything we do, which is, kind of the general happiness factor, if you will, right? That people who are able to walk to places and have amenities and do some of those things, there's a higher sort of happiness quotient. And I know that those are really hard to measure, but I think that's really the overall goal that we're striving for. And so I really love that. When it comes to comments, so David, you kind of alluded there at the end that that we'd have time after we get the recommendation from the Planning Commission. Do you want any comments before then, or do you want us to wait until we get that?
For us, it's easier to manage comments after the it's transmitted.
Okay.
they'll be able to input comments through the Convio platform. If you need help figuring that out, it's quirky, but it definitely works fairly well once you get used to it. We would also accept comments in other formats as well, although the Convio platform is what's preferred because it automates it on the back end and allows us to produce a matrix where we can respond to comments.
So all the PDF comments I have, I can, no, it's fine. I'm happy to convey them in whatever's easiest for you. And I'm happy to wait if you want. I've started going through it and have comments already. And I didn't know if you wanted those now or if I should wait. And questions.
I would just say at this point, we're happy to review them and consider them. It's just right now we're in kind of a heavy phase of getting comments and adapting. And we've also gotten to the point now where we're tracking our changes so that folks can see how things have changed. So that is just to say that there's a lot of attention to detail, and so we're happy to take the comments. We just might not address them until a little bit later.
I'm happy to wait. I don't want to create any extra work or confusion, so happy to wait on that. In terms of comments from the public, so I love also the history that you provided, but I will say that in the packet, it wasn't actually easy to get to the comp plan because there wasn't a direct link to that. So then I went back to the city website, and it doesn't always take you right to the comp plan when you go searching for it. So I'm wondering when you're ready, how will we communicate out to the community to get final comments, on the completed? Because I know you guys have done a lot of outreach, and I love that. But I think sometimes, until you see it all together, you don't really know what all that means. So how will we be able to put that on the front page of the website and have something directly there for people?
So we did realize that it was not front and center on our department's page. So we thank you to comment on that, and we were able to change that. So it is front and center now on the department's webpage, and we will work with our communications staff to make sure that we're doing media releases, social media releases, and notifying the public that is available. We handle public comments in that the comment comes to the body that is doing the review, making the recommendation, or taking the action, right? Mm-hmm. So we're not staffed or equipped to go line by line and debate or refute a comment from members of the public, because that would be extensive. And that's not something that we are budgeted for with this project. So we are providing and collating comments for your review, and they're providing them here, and we are listening to them as well. And we have threaded in many things in response to comments that we've heard where it is a really great recommendation or improvement, or where there was a typo or something that was noted. And the commission has heard from members of the public as well, and they have made recommendations on the plan in response to comments that they have received as well. So we will be providing a matrix responding to comments from the commission, and we will be providing a matrix responding to comments from the council, but we will not be providing a matrix responding to comments from the public.
Okay. And then the only comment that I have is just when reading through the plan, one of the things that struck me, there was a table in there, and I don't remember which table, but it talked about the affordability levels, and it actually showed the income level for a family of three. I think it was $105,000 was in the 50 to 80% range. So it made me think again. We use the term affordable housing, and I do think that has a particular connotation, right? When we think of affordable housing, we often think of people with sort of low, quote unquote, low incomes. And $105,000 is not a low income for a young family of three. And so I'm just wondering if that's something we can, try to make sure that we can clarify that fairly early on, that when we speak about affordability levels, right, as opposed to maybe affordable housing, so that people recognize that we're not really just talking about super low income levels. We're really talking about young couples with small children who might be in kindergarten, right, who are professionals, who may want to be able to live here and start to raise their family here.
Thank you. That's a great comment. And it's about accessibility and not just, affordable housing, but it's also accessible housing.
Yeah, and it just struck me when I actually saw the income level, right? We talk about 50 to 80% and 0 to 30, but to actually see that number in the table really just, I don't know, I kind of had a light bulb moment there. So thank you.
Deputy Mayor Howe.
Thank you. Kind of to piggyback on what was just being said about the comments, what I would love in a perfect world, that we'd be able to trend the word clouds over time, because I'd be very curious to see how they shift and evolve over time. I think it's a bigger ask than is really achievable, but I just wonder, as the population shifts, as people's come to terms with what's happening around them in their environment and what they want to see for the future, I wonder how, if there's a way to chart that trend, to just kind of see how the people change over time. Because the word cloud that I saw tonight, I don't think I would have seen 4 years ago, 10 years ago. And I'm just, it's a way to kind of keep the temperature front and center, to understand, where are we at? How are we feeling? Where are we at? So that's just sort of a comment. I was also curious as to, I know you're working on other comp plans.
Yes.
And how siloed are you from those? Do you have learnings from the other comp plans as you're going through the exact same process with lovely jurisdictions just like ours that we can benefit from in some way? Or do you guys get together? Do you talk about things, or how does it work?
Yeah, I think, so we're working on, I guess, 4 or 5 right now for different communities, and some in different counties, some that split 2 counties. I would say that, all the cities are dealing with some level of the same kind of complexity. So a lot of the issues that come up in the discussions about affordable housing and land use and climate change, all of the cities are really wrestling with that. I think a number of cities have very different growth targets, and I can't really underscore that point. So my most extreme example, and we completed a comp plan for them a year or 2 ago, not a periodic update, but they have 3,000 housing units in the community right now, and their preliminary growth target is 5,000 units. So they're going to have to, go almost 1.5 or so X times what they have right now. And I was explaining this to one of my other clients the other night, because they were, frustrated by some of the mandates from the state and the counties. Their growth target was something like 300 units. And so I offered them the perspective of
that sounds familiar,
this other community. So I think, to David's point that we talked about in preparation of this, the growth target is kind of a political process in terms of what you're advocating for. And, that, I think, resulted in the place we're at today. And I think on the flip side, Sammamish maybe proportionally doesn't have as big of a target, but all of our target is basically affordable housing. And so that is our challenge with which to face. And I think, we've been able to bring some of the things we've learned from other communities to Sammamish and vice versa. And I think the other thing that we really try to do is just not do the same thing in every community. I mean, we're not writing the same code for everyone. We're not putting in the same standards. We're really finding out what works for them and kind of applying a framework, for lack of a better term. And I think that really has worked well for us, and I think helps with the comfort level that everyone's kind of not getting the same cookie cutter plan. So I think,
right?
Yeah. So those are some of my takeaways. It's been pretty interesting to go through the process. It'll be very interesting to see how things play out over the next 5 years. And there's still, lots of work to do once the plan's adopted.
So as you're going forward on this work, are you doing overlays with other cities, or are we the city that's doing the overlay thing?
We're not doing an overlay.
Okay, because I think it's a really interesting concept. I think it gives us a lot of flexibility. I'm also very comfortable with ambiguity. But what I wondered is just what for something like a church property, for example, 8 units not interesting, 10 units totally boring. Can I get to 40? I want to make sure that there is that kind of heft in there.
So we've actually been approached by the Sammamish Presbyterian Church. They're very interested in a concept about the sort of the north half of their property. Very early stage of conversation with them.
But I'm excited.
And one concept that comes out of this is trying to remove barriers. So allowing for them to build some form of a 5/1 where the ground floor has services or a daycare or church offices or church facilities, and then there's 5 stories of apartments above it. And how do we work to make sure that it doesn't impact adjacent neighbors or minimizes them? You can't say doesn't, but minimizes impact to adjacent neighbors, removes the discretionary component of review from the city and the risk from anybody who's helping to spend money on, or being willing to spend money on that. The Kenmore example of what happened there.
Oh, yeah.
And how do we also get a product that looks good and fits into the community? So we're working on that right now, and we're confident that we can create what we call administrative ministerial review, which basically it's a building permit to build it. And so that's a question for you all to start thinking about is, what do you feel comfortable with? Because we likely are also exempt from SEPA on that. So it would really just be a building permit to build something like that. And if you're comfortable with that, we can make that happen. If you're not and you'd like to see some additional layers of review, then we could add that in there, right? Keep in mind also that a building permit is only appealable to Superior Court. It's not locally appealable versus something that's a director's decision that's a administrative appealable to hearing examiner type decision. So we're going to be talking about this. So start thinking about that and try and come up with what you're comfortable with.
Thank you for that preamble, because in this, this is a unique opportunity, I think, in this particular case, with a pastor who has specific background in building workforce housing, just as the background. So it'll be interesting to see how this progresses, and I'm optimistic that it will go well. I have a completely different question, and it may not make any sense at all. Given that we are on tribal ancestral lands, are there any tribal opportunities that for housing, given its ancestral land? Is there anything with the Indian Bureau of Affairs in terms of a map that's a demarcation of tribal lands that's technically theirs, that it's in a bank, and that they have the reserve for it?
So I'm not aware of anything of that nature. We will be meeting with the tribe fairly soon, and we could bring up their interest in housing here locally in Sammamish, the Snoqualmie tribe. We have been meeting with them and providing them versions of the draft to provide comment. We have received a host of comments from them on our comp plan. Some very interesting things like culturally modified trees and other things that we're trying to thread into the comprehensive plan to recognize the value of these things in our community. But we have not heard from them that I'm aware of, and maybe Evan could correct me, anything directly about producing housing related to supplying housing for their tribal members.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Lamb.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you for your work. I just wanted to mention that map that you mentioned for the New York Times. I love that interactive tool. I had spent time on that, and I remember when I first looked at it, I remember seeing Sammamish is super orange, and I just immediately went, oh my gosh, how are we going to make everybody spend less? But I understand, and I appreciate that you pointed out that there are cities that are green because they may be wealthy, but they're walkable too. So if we could just get to that place, we could, start turning Sammamish a little bit more green. My only question is inclusionary zoning. Are we looking at inclusionary zoning for the rest of the city and not just in town center?
So I'll start with this one, and Jeff can fill in as well. The Planning Commission's had some great conversations about middle housing. And keep in mind that we're actually in review of and recently received presentation from Arch on a middle housing affordability work that they did. And hopefully we're bringing that forward with all the body of the comp plan and code changes. They're recommending that there be an inclusionary affordability requirement added to capture value that's brought forward by HB 1110 through middle housing. Basically saying that if you're allowed to build a triplex in place of a single family home, that there should be affordability built into that, and you're either building it if you have enough units to build it, or you're providing it in the form of a fee in lieu if you can't build it physically. But that begs the question of, we are not allowed to make rules for middle housing any more restrictive than what we would also be requiring for single family. So one of the components of that is there may be a requirement that there be of inclusionary requirement, or a fee in lieu requirement, or a housing impact fee, if you will, that goes along with single family home production, because that would then set the baseline to include it. And then the argument could not be made that we're imposing something on middle housing, making it more restrictive than single family housing, if that makes sense. So we'll be bringing that forward. So far, the commission was providing positive feedback around the concept of capture of value, that if there is an allowance for you to build additional units, that there should be that level of capture. They were not comfortable with applying that to single family. So we're still working on that. We have a few more workshops with them, and we'll be wrapping up these code amendments with the Planning Commission on August 29th. So they'll be working through the summer on this stuff in order to get it to you for the fall. Anything else?
Okay, would it be below 80% AMI?
Yeah, I think that's up for discussion. And Arch recommends, if I recall correctly, it was the 50% and above is actually attainable. If you go deeper than 50%, it doesn't pencil out. They did run many pro formas, and there's a bunch of financial review. They hired an economist to work on it. So it's got a pretty strong foundation, and they did it jurisdiction by jurisdiction and profiled each jurisdiction based on values, sale values, existing land values, et cetera. Really fascinating report. So, if you'd all like, we could spend some time on that, and make sure you're aware of the work that Arch has done.
I'll just add a couple of things. One of the interesting pieces of that, and is sort of a bit of attention, is they provided some pro formas for different types of units in different communities. And the ones, construction costs are relatively similar, right? Don't vary that much. Land costs, of course, can change. But the projects that were feasible were in the places with the highest rents, therefore sort of at odds with the goals around affordability. I would say the notion of a broader inclusionary program is interesting because you're involving more land area, and so you're able to spread those costs out as opposed to like a few projects in a small area. But, and this is, I think, one of the things we're going to touch on in the town center presentation. It's really important to get all of those numbers and programs and incentives right. Because if you don't, people will not build, and they'll go to some other community and build that somewhere else. So my sense is that this will continue to be something we're going to discuss, but probably wouldn't be completely implemented by the end of the year, but is something that could happen in a future date. And I think we're focused on kind of the town center piece of their inclusionary zoning and trying to get that updated.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Do we have anything else, Council, for this portion? So it sounds like you've given us homework for August.
So we will be transmitting to you following Planning Commission closure.
Define transmit.
Transmit will be email
Hand
with a
deliver.
link.
Yeah. No, I like the transmit. Yeah. That sounds like.
We won't be dropping paper copies off on your front door.
Yes,
We've learned that lesson.
That was last time. Yeah. That was hilarious. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Evan. I think you're free. Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So next up, does anyone need a break? I know we started at 5:30 today. Yeah, 5-minute break? Okay, if that's all right, well, we get Miriam on. Okay, we'll take 5 minutes. We'll be back at 8:23. Thank you. All right, council. It is 8:23. Okay, so next up, we have a discussion on the Town Center Plan and Code Amendment Project Update.
Thank you, Mayor. David Pyle, Community Development Director. With me, I have Miriam Leitner, our Planning Manager, and Jeff Arango with Framework, our consultant, who is the lead on this work. And we will be providing a presentation and taking any comments about the status of this work and the schedule and what is next and expected. I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. So our topics tonight on Town Center, we're going to go over key themes from public and stakeholder engagement, some of the existing conditions and code audit findings, and our proposed amendment approach, and then we'll have time for questions and comments. This is essentially the same presentation that was given to the Planning Commission previously, of which we got feedback on. So first we'll start with a project overview. I'm sure most of you are very familiar with Town Center. It includes the core of 228th, the municipal campus, the A zone, which is intended to be kind of the heart of the Town Center, is along Southeast 4th, the newly improved Southeast 4th. And it includes several different zones spread across the Town Center, all of which we're looking at as part of this effort. There are, of course, some physical constraints from topography and forested areas and some critical areas that impact some of the development potential. And then over on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see footprints for some of the proposed new projects, which we'll talk about here in more detail in a moment. So this, again, shows those project footprints. Some of these projects have been constructed and some are in the pipeline where they've been approved but have not broken ground yet. And we'll go over some of those numbers. But you'll notice that there are large areas over the last 15 or so years, 16 years that the plan's been in place that are still relatively undeveloped or unchanged from that from when the initial planning process started. So ownership in Town Center is really a critical piece of it, and there is some consolidated ownership that has happened over time. So this map shows the different ownerships, and in the blue is the primary ownership by STCA, which includes the A zone and more of the intense zones there. There's also, of course, the City of Sammamish owned land down in the southwest corner. And then across on the east side on 228th, you can see there's a bit more varied ownership, but also some parcels owned by STCA. And I think the plan and the code intended to create a structure whereby property owners would work together to create shared infrastructure and investments, as well as, I think, support consolidated ownership, which has happened over time and does have implications for how the code gets applied, which I will go through during the code audit portion of the presentation. So these are the 4 stages of the project. We're in stage 2 right now. So stage 1 included our existing conditions and code audit, confirming the focus and priorities, and reviewing background and technical information, of which there is a lot to review. In stage 2, we're identifying options on alternatives, supplementing, developing the supplemental SEPA scope, which will be a supplemental piece of the original EIS with updated analysis around our current alternatives, and then developing some of the code concepts as well. And then stage 3 is really about performing the actual updates to the Town Center amendment, the draft SEIS with the action alternatives and the draft code revisions. And then stage 4 is review and approval process. So I'll talk about feedback. We've had a number of events. We had a February public open house that was very well attended. We had a series of June stakeholder workshops with property owners and developers and others that was very informative. We had some stakeholder interviews. We've gotten city feedback. and then, of course, our planning commission and city council meetings, including public comment. Some of the common themes from that feedback, but before I go through that, I'd just like to mention that, one of the strongest pieces of the plan as it currently exists, and I think can largely be carried forward, is really the community goals and desired outcomes for the project. I mean, that really holds up well. And I think from the standpoint of the vision and the policy and goal direction, we can carry a lot of that forward. I think where the challenges are with the plan is really related to how the plan translates to the code and the implementation and development of the plan, of which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So some of the themes that we heard as part of the engagement, and this has some tie-ins with the comp plan, desire for new businesses, services, and activities in the city, desire for affordable and market rate units and more variety in housing, some strong concerns around tree retention, and I think there are definitely some strategies that we can carry forward that look at both tree retention, but also tree plantings and being able to integrate natural vegetation and features into the project. Concerns around parking issues and traffic impacts, of which we will be looking at as part of our analysis under the EIS. Mentions about concerns around school capacity and a desire for increased walkability and improved transportation services, which is also something we heard at some of the comp plan events. Some other themes that came, I think, largely out of some of the stakeholder meetings is that the allocation of land uses in the town center plan and in zoning do not consistently align with market realities. So in some cases, the code requires something, but the market is challenged to be able to deliver that. The zoning approach with respect to transfer of development rights and affordable housing bonus pool does not fairly distribute development potential among properties. Some properties are able to access that, others are not, and it really creates a potential imbalance within the structure of the town center property ownership. And then the current zoning and approval process, and this is feedback we got from city staff, stakeholders, developers, largely all in agreement that the current zoning and approval process is cumbersome, confusing, and unpredictable. Affordable housing requirements must allow for feasible development. So if we're going to put in place incentives, they must have the ability to deliver those, or it won't happen. It'll happen in another community, or it simply won't happen. Affordable housing initiatives tend to be effective when private entities or nonprofit housing organizations work with the community and with the city to come together for common solutions. And some of those concepts are embedded in the strategies within the comp plan. Code amendments are needed to address unnecessary barriers for small property owners. So a lot of the incentives really only work at a certain scale. So if you're SDCA, you've been able to leverage that. If you're a small developer, you can't, and it really impacts the feasibility of your project. So we'll provide a lot more information on that in a few moments. Code is just overly complicated and has, in some cases, some illogical consequences associated with it. And then the last one is regarding the TCE zone, which is in the south east portion, and that was identified as a reserve zone. And so kind of taking a fresh look at that for how it can support the goals for the town center. Okay, we'll go through a few numbers here. So there's been projects. You okay? Do you want to hold my hand up there?
I think they're going to lower the blinds in the conference room back there.
Okay. There we go. All right. So this just goes over some of the numbers of market rate and affordable housing units. At the top are the units that have actually been built. The proposed units are within the pipeline but have not broken construction yet. And the preferred alternative within the EIS was around 2,000 units. 101,058 units have been built or proposed, and that leaves the balance of about 942 units available under the preferred alternative under the existing EIS. So this addresses kind of the role of the supplemental EIS and what we're planning to look at. So the original EIS looked at 4,000 units as part of the EIS to study the impacts. And when you do a planned action EIS, which has the ability to remove site-specific SEPA review for projects if it falls under the assumptions in the EIS, those projects have to fit within the range of alternatives that you discussed or that you reviewed. So if we study up to 4,000 units then and agree that that's a preferred alternative of which we don't necessarily even have to select one, projects up to that amount would be covered under the EIS. Projects beyond that would have to do their own project-specific SEPA unless the city expanded or did an updated supplemental EIS to be able to address that. So it's simply a SEPA number because it's required. It's not meant to be a cap on development or a minimum. And really the growth that we're planning for is addressed in the comp plan and is really not impacted by the town center plan. We are looking at zoning and development intensity levels, but like it is in the comp plan, the zone capacity is a different topic and not necessarily what we're planning for. So bonus pools, there's a large bonus pool within town center that you can access in different ways, and some projects have already taken advantage of that. There's a 10% affordability requirement, which, you know, depending on the scale of project, will result in a certain number of units, and the code allows for a range of income categories, but all of the existing and proposed units are at 80% AMI and above because that's the most feasible. And some cities, you know, have a kind of a graduated scale. If you provide units of deeper affordability, you get more credit for that and whatnot. But the main takeaway here is that the bonus pool has been exhausted, and so therefore property owners that haven't been able to access it are not able to do so. And again, that impacts what they're able to build, the feasibility of that, and whether that really fits into the vision and goals for town center, I think, is something we need to consider and discuss. Okay. So now we're going to go through the code audit, and I think this really has some really strong takeaways here. And some of this I've already kind of mentioned, but you know, the code's confusing and difficult to administer. Development standards and densities are not aligned. So for example, the city allows mid-rise apartment buildings in certain zones, up to about 70 feet in height. But you can't build that unless you're able to access bonus units through this complicated system, TDRs and so on and so forth. Some of them cost money to have to purchase, and they're in finite supply. So those have been already allocated to specific developments and not available. So there's a misalignment between sort of what the development standards say you can do and what you actually can do if you aren't able to access those incentives. Area-wide allocations for residential density and commercial space are overly prescriptive and make feasibility challenging. So for example, there's a total number of commercial space that gets allocated. There's a base amount that gets allocated, and then through this very subjective list of incentives, there can be additional space allocated. But I think what's most important to realize is that developers operate with the property that they have or they purchased. And so when they go to look at a project, they look at what they can develop on their lot, not how much square footage you could develop in the whole town center. And in some cases, those are not aligned, right? You may want 500,000 square feet of commercial, but there's only a handful of properties that are really ever going to have, I think, substantial amounts of commercial development. Certainly Sammamish Village is an example of that, but that came to be almost through kind of by chance somewhat in terms of how the zoning was structured, and I think is a good example of a site that really has commercial viability because of its proximity on 228th, which is really not where most of the commercial development is planned. So trying to align those pieces is really important for achieving the goals of the town center. And then lastly, there's some standards that are specific in the town center code that are also addressed in citywide codes. For example, there's standards around accessory dwelling units that are in both parts, and so making sure that those are reconciled and that we're not duplicating standards. Standards are poorly illustrated. In some cases, there's reliance on planning documents that lack regulatory clarity. So there's been some interim street standards that have been adopted. There's also the infrastructure plan, which is, an interesting planning document, certainly, but it's been adopted into the code. And the attempts, I think, to use it as a regulatory document has not been super successful. So trying to clarify that and make sure that we're using codes that are effective, easy to interpret, provide fairness and predictability. Really important. Again, the commercial space allocations by subzone, not aligned with market realities that favor visibility and access. Density incentive program has been exhausted or in stasis. And then the UZDP process is very challenging to navigate and administer. And we've heard that from the city staff that are in charge of that process, as well as applicants and others involved. So I think there's pretty universal agreement on many of these key findings. Okay. So now we're going to go through some really simple diagrams that help to illustrate the story of what you can do in the town center and how the incentives work. And so what we're showing here, this is based on the A zone, so the most intense part of the city, town center, and the allocated density of 18 units per acre. And if you were to put that in a 3-story apartment building, and you were to take a standard 400 by 400 foot urban block and put that on one half of it, that's the amount of space it would fill up. And that's all you can do under the base densities. Those could also be arranged as townhouses. We've shown them in an apartment building here just for illustrative purposes. And so the only way that you could build like a mid-rise apartment building is to be able to access the incentives. The other thing that you could do is you could develop the rest of your portion with commercial development, like another grocery store or something, but that is not really going to be viable because you already have that, and most of the properties don't have the visibility or access to make them feasible to develop in that manner. In the code, there's also listed a maximum density, but it's not actually a maximum density. There are ways to exceed that through incentives. And so if you were to take the max density and put that into a 3-story apartment building, that's how much you would fill up of the block. So the ability to build something like the apartment building that's up the hill from, or part of Sammamish Village, and that was only possible because that apartment building is drawing density from that entire commercial site and also using incentives. So if they didn't have that land with which to take density, they wouldn't be able to do what they did. So that's, I think, really important. And, we have looked at other city zoning, and most of the other cities that, developers would look at in comparison to Sammamish, many of them would let, through a much easier, more prescriptive process, allow for mid-rise development consistent with the development standards that are already in place. So I think one of the positives, we're not talking about increasing building heights or intensity, we're just really talking about alignment and how you get there. So this is an example, and this is pretty similar to some of the projects that are in the pipeline. So there's, I think, 3 or 4 buildings in the pipeline, mid-rise buildings. One of them is mostly a parking garage. But these are the sites that have been able to take advantage of the incentives to be able to build a mid-rise development. So this is, again, very theoretical, but it's showing you kind of a typical mid-rise building you might see in an urban environment, 6, 7 stories on a typical urban block. If you do the math on that in terms of net density, just counting the acreage within the site, you get to about 140 dwelling units per acre. And if you look at those projects that are in the pipeline, their density is generally in that range. So that alone right there is a pretty confusing way to message that the max density is 40 units an acre, but it's really not. And there's also a fairly challenging set of assumptions around how density is calculated. And the intention is to give people credit for new streets that they're building, But for folks that aren't building new streets or aren't drawing density from larger land area, it makes their projects really challenging from a feasibility standpoint. So those are really, I think, important kind of takeaways. And then this example, not to confuse you, but if you wanted to build this using the 40 units per acre density, this is how much land you would need. So all the area in the light gray is just vacant land that you would need to get the density to build those buildings. So it's interesting because density and buildings aren't always aligned, right? It depends on how big the parcel is. And so, again, if you can't access those incentives, you can't build something like this. If you can't build something like this, then you're really going to be challenged to provide any really measurable affordable housing on any scale. Okay. So I think, this has been a really illuminating process of going through the code, and I think it's really kind of driven our thinking and strategy around the code updates being really important. I think the vision, the community goals, we don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel on that. I think there's some strategic updates that we could make and some feedback we could get from the city council and commission and the public on that. But I think, largely that stuff all holds up. It's really around the implementation and structure of the code. So we're proposing kind of three approaches. One, to simplify and recalibrate the city's approach to affordable housing, really focusing on the inclusionary zoning piece of it. We have some citywide strategies on affordable housing, like the bonus parcels, perhaps leveraging some city-owned parcels, things like that, that I think we can incorporate into our thinking around town center and really focus on updating the IZ program, which is really the foundation of the city's current affordable housing program. So we want to clarify the town center code, make it more accessible, user-friendly, easy to interpret, and get really good outcomes, most importantly. And then streamline some of the administration of the town center code, again, to avoid confusion, undue process, so on and so forth. So those are kind of the three things that we're recommending. Again, around affordable housing, our primary strategy will be to leverage private sector housing development to provide affordable housing opportunities in the city, in the town center. Focusing on the 50 to 80% AMI ranges, since that tends to be what is feasible within an IZ program, understanding we have other strategies that will address the other income levels. And then for goal one, we want to establish an updated, simple, and clear requirement to provide affordable units, not something that, is difficult to interpret or understand or implement. Feasible levels of bonus densities that can be achieved through market rate approaches to affordable housing. And then removing limits on the ability to use density bonuses, which directly impact the amount of affordable housing that can be developed at appropriate densities. So again, aligning the standards which allow you to build this with the approaches and strategies for how you get there. Focusing more on by right development with strong affordability requirements. So our second goal, to clarify the code, one of the things we're tasked with is to develop new street and sidewalk standards, which I think will be a great asset moving forward and something that's been in the work program for the city for a while. Replacing ambiguous and conflicting guidelines and standards, removing some of the discretion, I think is also really important. Not to say that city staff, has made any errors in leveraging that, but it just it just is, I think, outside the bounds of what would be expected in terms of discretion for some of the incentives that are granted through that process. Recalibrate and adjust relationships and requirements within and among the zones. So looking at some of how those zones are applied. One thing, just to give another point of reference, those diagrams were based on the A zone, the most intense zone, but there are actually areas within town center that don't even meet the middle housing requirements. So their densities are lower. And so that's going to require, at least in the near term, some use of probably the overlay zone until we potentially or will develop a longer term fix as part of this process. But that was sort of interesting finding from this work as well. Aligning the town center specific and citywide standards, such as for ADUs, removing redundancies, revisiting the TCE zone, which is identified as a reserve zone, and then establishing potential maximum unit densities within the bounds of the EIS is another goal. And then finally, streamlining. We want to reduce the degree of administrative discretion. It's been difficult to define, predict, and be consistent about. And I think this was some things that were also raised by the hearing examiner. And then replace the UZDP process with a more direct, clear, and efficient process. Things like development agreements and other types of more prescriptive processes, I think, can produce the same or ideally better outcomes while avoiding some of the confusion that the process has led to. So some of our next steps, we're going to be working on the affordable housing requirements. We have an economist on the team to look at some pro formas and some feasibility around prototypes, and that work is in progress. We anticipate having the first results of that here within the next week or two. Looking at how maximum densities can be achieved through bonuses or other strategies. The ratios of affordable housing to market rate units, really important. Barriers to the utilization of any bonus pool, reducing impact fees and other requirements that can help make affordable housing more feasible, and then looking at the multifamily tax exemption program. And then step 2, we're going to start beginning the drafting first of the amendments to the town center plan, and then the code updates, as well as the EIS work as well. And we have a joint meeting coming up in October with the Planning Commission and City Council, so looking forward to that. And with that, I'll pause and turn it back over to the mayor.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, I think it was like the second or third slide you showed that kind of just blew my socks off. The ratios of market rate to affordable housing of 1 to 3 and 1 to 2. Like, we should be winning some award for that. That may be some of the best outcomes I've ever heard of in terms of housing. So hats off to our staff and others who helped make that happen. And so if I understand correctly, not to try to summarize all this work too briefly, but that was only really achievable through the bonus pool. And that's part of what you guys are looking at, right? Is, I mean, I don't know what Arch's take on all of this is, but they must be pretty excited at the outcomes here as a model, even for other areas, right, on how to achieve better outcomes in terms of those ratios. Do you have any other sort of words of wisdom for us or things we should be thinking about to be able to continue to achieve similar types of ratios? Because that's honestly, that's better than I thought that we would be able to achieve.
I would agree with you. I think it's really, the ratios I think are pretty similar to other communities. I haven't looked in depth at numbers, but around 10 or 15% is pretty common. The only thing I would note is just that some of these have not actually been built yet. So they are proposed and they are in the pipeline, but in some cases it took a lot of time and effort to get to those numbers. And so I agree the outcome is good, but with this more simpler prescriptive process, I think we could have gotten the same outcomes perhaps in a shorter time frame potentially.
Can you show, I think it was the next slide maybe that had the actual ratio. Oh, maybe it was before, there we go. That's the slide. So this is like where the ratio is 1 to 3. So that's like 30%, or well, that's 25%, right? That's 4 units and one of them is affordable. So that's like a 25%, isn't it? So it's a 25 to 33% affordable. So that's great. So I love that, and I'm fully supportive of, whatever we can do to try to aim for those types of outcomes. I think that's really the best thing. Because again, just to clarify for anyone watching at home, right? When we talk about affordability, we're talking about, in this case, probably more like the 80% affordability range, which isn't super low income. So maybe we won't achieve the same exact ratios. Maybe we'll see different ratios, but we could get some units that are more deeply affordable. which would also be a win, right?
I'd say that's definitely one of the goals of this project is to look at deeper affordability, the 50 to 80, even down possibly to the 30 to 50 range. It's a little harder to get to. I think another thing to consider, asking in terms of my reactions is density. Efficient use of land. If you go back to the graphics where we're showing the R18 and the R40, that's not getting you this.
Correct. Yeah.
So
I was just going to say, one thing to point out is this doesn't include all the units, I think, in the project, because this is just bonus units. So the ratios are...
Oh, so this is the ratio for the bonus units, not the total units built.
Correct.
Ah,
but
okay.
the total is still around 15, I think around 15%.
Oh, now, so you got me all excited.
The 10% requirement on those right out the door.
Right.
And then once you get into the affordable housing pool, bonus pool, which has now been exhausted, this is the ratio that's being achieved with those units on top of the base units.
Got it.
One thing to note is, as we go through the plan and we go through the code and we look at where there might be gaps or opportunities or issues, a lot of it comes down to density, right? And that the plan is doing a great job trying to achieve lots of different things. It's a bit perplexed because it wants to do all of these things that aren't necessarily harmonious with each other. And it wants the builder to do lots of things that the builder can't necessarily do and still provide these units. So we're going to want to have a conversation about what is the right level of amenity to be provided by a developer, what is the right level of density, and what is the right level of balancing. And this is the big one for 25, I think, the right level of balancing tree retention and tree planting versus density,
right?
Because that is really one of the biggest gives and takes that goes along with density. And we need to decide as a community. I'm not saying that tree retention is not important, but I am saying that it is very difficult to retain trees in their existing location and still provide the density that is needed to achieve some of these goals. And that seems to be one of the biggest barriers for areas outside of the TCA where there are tree retention requirements that we're seeing is with regard to how do you achieve density and also retain the trees that the code is requiring you to retain in existing locations that might not be amenable to placing a building in that location where you really need to put the building.
And part of what we talked about during the break, right, was the New York City is green, not just because of the walkability and the transit, but the multifamily, right? So the densities actually do help with that, lowering the emissions, right? I mean, multifamily units have fewer external walls, right? They're just more efficient, and they can have more efficient systems that use a lot less energy and produce a lot less greenhouse gases. So, okay, thank you.
Councilmember Treen.
All right, so first, talk to me, just help me understand the supplemental SEPA scope. Like, what is it and why?
Yeah, so it's really to refresh the assumptions in the analysis, primarily around transportation, but potentially other topics that incorporate current conditions as they are today, but also are able to allow us to look at the changes that are being considered and ultimately help us inform the decision-making around the final direction of the plan and the code. So that is the purpose. Since we are going to be studying a relatively similar amount of growth than in the original EIS, I think there's an argument that could be made that that's covered under what was done previously. But I think good planning practice would suggest that we should update that to make sure we're covering all of our bases. And so that's the reason for the supplemental EIS.
When's the plan that you'd bring the scope of that to the council?
So that would be in the form of the proposed action. So once we have an action established, then we would go about completing a supplemental environmental impact statement, and that would address gaps between what was previously studied and what the action brings. Remember that SEPA is not a permit or approval. SEPA really is a disclosure document intended for you all to understand what the range of impacts might be from a proposed action. And so that work, we're already doing a lot of the background work here. And I think it's really important to understand that what we're doing here with the background analysis, the code audit, is all part of the background work that would be done as part of a supplemental environmental impact statement. The piece that's missing for us to really kick off the SEIS work in earnest is for us to have a clearly defined action about what exactly we're proposing to do. And we're working on that. That's part of this. And we're hopeful to get there. I would say this fall we'll end up in the position where we have that action defined, which would then allow us to complete the SEIS work going towards the end of Q1 and Q2 and into Q2 of 2025.
Okay. On page 15, yeah. So you were talking in here, and then you just said, what are we planning for?
Over the next 20 years, we're planning for the 2,100 units in the comp plan.
So you're planning for the 2,100, but you're going to study up to 4,000.
Yeah, and the reason being that could theoretically happen over a longer period of time. It's really a scenario planning tool and not really tied to the 20 years of the comprehensive plan.
Wait, can you say that again?
We would be studying the 4,000 units, but not within the 20-year period of the comp plan, so that we're planning for it. I mean, it could happen never, or it could happen over a longer period of time. We're trying to understand the potential cumulative impacts of that amount of development within town center.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard you say. So, all right. Just so I'll be honest with you guys, because you're the staff working on this, this is exactly why I just thought it was unnecessary to do this in the first place. So it was, but putting that aside for now, I think, David Pyle, you're totally right on one of the barriers, and that is this tree retention. And when I start looking at the whole of the town center property, right, I look at also there's some critical areas, and then critical areas as in the wetlands, the streams, steep slope, landslide hazardous, those kind of areas that are within the town center plan. And so why wouldn't this, or my hope is that one of the outcomes of this supplemental plan of action is to look at how do we retain the trees so that they can do their job. 2 would be how do we do trail connectivity that is not roads and sidewalks, because you're going to have to put in some buffers on those critical areas. So those are unbuildable lands. So I would hope that one of the outcomes is that we would have those kind of things: tree retention, trail connectivity that's not a road or a sidewalk. And then we would actually look at the buffers and how much of the area is, in a sense, not buildable, which would lead then for someone like myself is that to accomplish the goal of what I think really is what this is all about, is to get affordable housing or to get more dwelling units that are at a less, under the 120%. So then the outcome then that I would think that would be acceptable would be to allow higher or denser areas so that I could actually have the parts of the property that aren't being utilized for the dwelling units then also becomes that connectivity, the trails, the trees are still there then. So if you could go higher and denser, but leave more open space, because here's where's Treen coming from. Councilmember Treen is coming from, and the idea is that I'm looking through it the lens of equity and inclusion and belonging and what we love about Sammamish. Well, give me a park then. Give me a place where I could step out of my apartment building and walk across a street or down the backside of my building on a trail, and I'm in nature. Welcome to Sammamish. So then if I have a wildlife corridor or pathway that doubles as a corridor, I'm going to see birds. I'm going to see the bobcats. I'm going to see the cougar walking down 24th. Okay? The bobcats live here. So let's not destroy everything and fragment it to the point where you destroy the character of Sammamish. And I think that's not just my perspective of what the outcome of the town center should look like. I mean, former candidate even produced a flyer that had the skyscraper and the tree walking hand in hand and said they could live together. And so, yeah, then how do we do that? And that's a difficult question for you, but those are the outcomes I'm looking for.
So what I'm hearing is more akin to a master plan community. And
sure.
Yeah, and I think, providing flexibility, and I think you kind of highlighted the importance of trade-offs, right? And I think there's sometimes a tendency of think of development as, for obvious reasons, because oftentimes it is, but contrary to environmental goals. But I think stepping back for a bit and looking at the opportunities to have denser development in certain locations, its support for walkability and ability to integrate nature into the city, I think is achievable on some level, and certainly something that we can explore.
Well, if you open up the stormwater just alone and don't vault the whole thing, I have an amenity that I can walk around with a fountain in it so that the actual water system that's in there is actually doing some good. So it just seems to me that we have an opportunity here to do something super special in Sammamish. And if it's not going to be, what we've seen so far is troubling, concerning, because all it is concrete, glass, steel, and asphalt. Well, then the impact on the environment is at its highest, which if we were just to do the development instead in the places where there already exists the concrete and the asphalt and the steel and the glass, and did the exact same kind of incentives, then we would be farther ahead in the long run. Then we could be what I would consider a sustainable city then. Because we as a council, we as a staff and city, the residents included, it would become a sustainable city over 50 to 100 years then. Thank you for your time. And I'm not totally for this opening it up and doing all this work, because I think it's spending a lot of money, but to help the process, I think you should consider some of the things the outcomes that I'm asking for. Thank you.
Councilmember Lamb.
Thank you, Mayor. There was a slide for updated conditions that showed, so Sammamish Town Center Phase 2, it's showing 4 affordable units. We have a 10% inclusionary. I thought that would be like at least 30 units.
Yeah, I think that has to do with some of the bonus units that they perhaps purchased through the TDR program and how they were consolidated. So I can get you a more specific answer on that, but there are some instances, and this shows it, where some projects are not delivering high amounts of affordable housing.
Could have been that they used up like all the bonus, like what was allotted, and so there was nothing left at that point.
I think that's part of it, but I also just think the nature of the bonus units that they used for this particular phase was more of the market rate bonus units, which is one of the avenues that you can use to get bonus units.
And this project, phase 2, the phase 2 UZDP, we also call it, it has not been approved yet. It's in review. So these numbers could change, but we'll definitely go back and take a look at the proposal and understand the density there. I don't understand either. I think it could be that it's the base R18 zone and that's what the 4 is driven off of, but that they're getting to the additional market units by way of cashing in their TDR credits that they bought from King County that they're allowed to use, and that they're not required, because it's a TDR program, they're not required to provide affordability, inclusionary affordability with the TDRs, but they are required to provide it with the base density of R18. So I could see how you could get to 4 with a base density of R18. And then you would layer on top of that the TDR units, which are not subject to the 10% inclusionary requirement.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I thought like 10% is kind of across the board.
And that's something that, we could, is open, the door is open to assessing that. However, we always need to remember that with that, every give, there's a take, right? Mm-hmm. Every take, there's a give. And it's sort of that, how it all works across the board. So trying to understand what the best package overall is, but it sure would be nice to know that all the units are 10% of the total unit count at a minimum will be affordable 80% and above.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. My second question, I guess it's more of an observation, is that I've watched some of the planning commission meetings, and even here, when you have presented, there's a lot of discussion on affordability. And I know that we also are talking about diverse housing, but we're not talking quite so much about diverse housing. And when I take a look at what's built and what's proposed, and adding up the number of apartments and the number of townhomes, the ratio is like 5 times as many apartments to townhomes. And so there's only, so the cap is at 2,000. So if you take that 5-to-1 ratio, we're going to end up with 1,600 apartments and like 300 townhomes, which when I think about diverse housing, and I think about that the vast majority of homes in Sammamish are these large single-family 3,000 square foot homes, and people are going to want to downsize, or we talk about people that want starter homes. 363 townhomes doesn't sound like very much. So I guess, are we looking at, and maybe this is a conversation more with the developer, are we looking at ways to make it, are we looking at ways to promote more condos and like not allowing any more single family homes? Because I know at Brownstones West, there was single family units proposed, and then those all turned into townhomes, which is great. So I guess what I'm saying is that the 5-to-1 ratio seems very skewed, that, we should, if we're talking about that, the conversation shouldn't just be about affordable units. Like we really should be talking about diverse housing as well. And how do we get more condos, and how do we get more non-single detached homes? I don't think they're in the plan, but if they are, they really shouldn't be. Cottage housing.
So the good news is that this portion of town center work, the TCA, is largely where you see apartments being built. The TCB and the TCC and the TCE, that's reserve zone. There's a large amount of acreage that has not been built on yet and does not have projects that are moving through design at this point in time that are largely going to be built in the form of the diverse housing type you're asking for, mostly townhomes. And the builders that we've talked to are very interested in building townhomes. They're just trying to get to that part of the acreage that is available. You have to build roads to get there first. You have to deploy infrastructure to get there first. So they kind of build on top of it, and it's additive as they move out away from 4th, for example, or over here it'd be behind the Aegis building. We have some developers who are looking to move forward with development back there in the form of townhomes. So they're just really trying to find the time when the climate, the finances, the existing infrastructure allows for them to get to that product. But it's not to say that you couldn't also build some of these buildings in the TCA with condos. Condo or apartment, there's a minor type of construction type that's different, but you could build larger units and condominiumize them and sell them as 3-bedroom flats in the TCA as well. So it's a question we could bring back to the development community: is how do we get that and see that what we need to do and bring that to you all and see what you're willing to do to help get that product on the ground.
Yeah,
Okay,
we are going to be testing some of those prototypes as part of the economic feasibility analysis, and I think David's right on. Those areas outside of the A and probably B zone are the opportunities to introduce that. And as I mentioned earlier, because the zoning is even below the middle housing, I mean, we're at least going to have to make those updates, and so there's an opportunity to, I think, address what you've described, which is kind of more middle housing and more variety between apartments and townhomes.
Okay, and that's really good to hear. So it's just this phase that we're going through. Okay, great. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Howe?
Thank you. To channel Councilmember Treen for a second, I think I understand a lot of what he was saying in terms of fragmentation, trade-offs, tree retention, and so forth. I've also been discussing this with peers, and other cities have the exact same problem. This is not new. The tree thing is a big thing. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's a weird tension between tree retention and people that want to take down their trees or their neighbors' trees because they're blocking my view. So it's the same people. But all towns, all cities seems to have the same thread. I've also heard from the developer community too that it's trees that are really expensive to deal with as a developer. So what's going to help me, I think, as we start to move ahead on decisions, is a matrix that helps me understand the trade-offs, because it's going to be give and take on trees. The tree bank is going to have to happen because I don't see another way around it. And other cities aren't doing a ton of it, but there's certainly talk of it in the other cities. Trying to understand how, again, to avoid the spaghetti code with our code so that we can get to predictable, reliable. You can build here because you're not going to get, messed up with it, with code restrictions that come out of the blue that are ununderstandable. So understanding what the development community needs in order to give us really good product, figuring out how do we get something so that we have the kinds of developers that actually want to do wonderful work here. Wonderful work that isn't fractionalized and fragmented, that does have some kind of flow or rhythm or some kind of energy to it that actually makes coherence and sense. I don't know if that's achievable, but that's where I'm trying to go. And so that to get to what Councilmember Treen was saying too, so that we are able to preserve natural areas, keep the connections and the corridors in a way that again contributes to that flow. So that is what I'm looking for, I think, as well. But a decision matrix would be very helpful to help us understand the myriad of trade-offs here. Because there are several, and they're going to be really, really hard.
Councilmember O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mayor. You had mentioned you have like an economist on staff who are kind of looking at various aspects of this update, and I know this is not part of something that you're going to be looking at, but when I think about, when we talk about affordable housing, when we talk about that kind of thing, and I think back to the decades past when I was first buying a house, and really when I came to this country, and we bought a townhouse in Redmond, it was 1,300 square feet. It was perfect, 2 bedrooms, just right off Avondale Road, so it's access to the bus because I took the bus everywhere at that point. But the only way for us to get financing was through an FHA loan, and that's what really worked. Now, looking at what FHA loans are offering right now, you have to buy a lot of insurance now. If you're only going to put 3% down, you have to come in with mortgage insurance, and that can be really expensive, and that can be for a very long time. So I just wonder, when we're talking about affordable housing and we're talking about building these units, and we're looking at people who are in that 50% to 80% AMI, even if we're able to build that kind of housing, how are they going to get the financing to be able to get in there? With FHA loans, you can come in with 3.5% down, but if you're going to do that, then you have to buy mortgage insurance, and that, like I say, that can be very expensive. So I hope that we can get to build a lot of this, or at least create the conditions within which this type of housing can be built. But I still think external factors, we still have a lot of work to do in order to allow people who would like to live in those homes who can actually afford to finance them. So I think we've got a lot of work to do, maybe through, I don't know, how that program can be revamped, where that kind of mortgage insurance is not really necessary anymore. It certainly wasn't back in the day when I was, and that's how we afforded our home. And we bought our home here in Sammamish, which is like just down the street here. It's 1,700 square feet, built by Murray Franklin. That type of housing is not being built anymore, and it's a duplex. We had a shared wall. And so that's the kind of housing that I'd love to see us being able to facilitate again. I just wonder, with our financial structure, with the mortgage structure, how affordable is it really for people to be able to obtain and get into those homes? So anyway, that's just a question for another day. And I know as things loosen up, maybe as the economy keeps going forward, maybe those kind of financial instruments will come back again. But it just does seem to be rather a tough, high mountain to climb for some people to get the down payment and then to get the financial structures that they need to be able to get into those homes and stay there. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that's just something beyond our control, I know, but just interesting to note.
Just by way of numbers, Arch receives between 200 and 250 applicants per housing unit that comes on the market, and they have to sift through those. Funding's one of the components of that. So it's tough,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and it seems a lot tougher now than it was. So yeah, so anyway, let's hope that maybe somebody out there will restructure FHA loans and help people get back into homes. That's what I hope. Thank you.
Councilmember Gupta.
Thank you for the presentation. At the Planning Commission meeting, I think on the 20th, I think the comment was made that it's better to change the rules once and get them right, because otherwise the development community, if they're expecting a high amount of fluctuation, they're just going to sit there and wait for the next change that is maybe more amenable. So that really stuck out to me, that how important it is to really dive deep into this and make sure that we are properly regulating, but also incentivizing so that we do actually get the outcome of more affordable or accessible housing. I did have a question, I think at that same Planning Commission meeting, in reference to the multifamily tax exemption program. It was mentioned that the full evaluation of the options will take a couple of months from then, so probably end of August. And previously in presentations to council, I think there was mention of like a scale of what our levers are and what we're giving and what we're taking, I guess. So is that the same tool? Is that what that is kind of?
Yeah, it's the financial feasibility analysis to understand how you can leverage public benefits, affordable housing, and perhaps others as well. So yes, that is embedded into that analysis.
And does that include at least reference to experiences from other communities? Like I know Redmond has put in they made a higher requirement, or they did some development and then said, gosh, we wish we could have put the required affordable housing a little bit higher. So is that also going to feed into that analysis?
Probably more at a cursory level. Actually, I was just looking at Redmond's program today as a comparison. So I think we probably will include like a review of it, but not like really detailed financial analysis about that. But just understanding at a relatively high level what developers would encounter between the different communities, I think is really important. And it was brought up by the development community in our stakeholder meetings, just that, they want to go where there's some measure of predictability and they feel like they can accomplish their goals and they have choices with which to do that. I mean, maybe less so if you already own property, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to develop it. So
another big one that came up was the in terms of predictability was the fee in lieu. So that's one to start thinking about now, is the degree to which you would be comfortable offering a fee in lieu as an alternative. Because those funds could then be either put in the Arch Housing Trust Fund, or those funds could be pooled by the city and then provided to a not-for-profit builder under some scenarios. So many cities do have a fee in lieu program. The builders did identify that in some circumstances that's what drives them to Seattle, because Seattle does have a fee in lieu program that they feel is economically set to be right at the right point. And I know that some years ago, there was quite a bit of back and forth in Seattle over that. There are many newspaper articles on it. We'll definitely dive into that a little bit with our economists and consider what a fee in lieu program would mean for the city.
yeah, I mean, one thing just to note about a fee in lieu program, if you're collecting that money, then you also have to program for how to use it. And, David mentioned some where it might be, relatively straightforward to put into an existing program. But that's where I see some of the challenges with the fee in lieu program, is you really just have to seize the opportunity and have an effective way to use the funds, because there are some limits, time limits usually, and when you have to use them by.
Thank you. And I know we previously discussed an internal or an intercity TDR program. And obviously there are maybe some things we have to tackle in terms of how that marries with affordability requirements. But could you remind me what the timeline on that is and how that lines up with these plans?
Sure. We've continued to have quite a bit of discussion on TDRs, both with King County and with the state. And one of the things that comes to mind about an internal TDR program is sort of the economy of scale and the ability to ramp that up and operate it. Somewhat challenging for us to find properties that want to would want to give up some of their rights to their land and sell those credits, and then match them up with a buyer who might want to use them at the right time in their project when they could actually use it. It's challenging. So I think we're less inclined to want to recommend that type of approach at this point. We also see that TDR programs are land conservation programs. They're not affordable housing programs. So you don't get the affordability that goes along with it. Instead, you get the density, and the density moves around, and you could get the housing typologies that you want, because you could say that these units have to be used for townhouses or condos. But it's the affordability component of it that you can't necessarily attach to it, because you're already achieving a land conservation objective, and adding into that an affordable housing objective to it changes the dynamics of the land acquisition, conservation, easement, and resale. So that adds a lot of complexity to that. So we're the TDR program with the county is up and running. That is something they have land available. They could sell us the credit, sell our developers the credits, and they could we are operating that now. For us to build an internal program would be fairly substantial lift. I'm simply trying to highlight some of the things we've talked about since we met on TDRs last, and that we don't see that there would be, in terms of the horizon, it might be a 10-year horizon or a 15-year horizon before that really started to take off. And it also brings the question about the fact that we are in an urban growth area, and is it really the best use of land in the urban growth area to set it aside in conservation, when really that's where density and growth should be going. The TDR program the county runs works because it's setting aside land in a rural area in favor of moving it to an area that's in the urban growth area, where the density is, according to state law and regional planning, supposed to go. So there's also sort of that conflict and objective with an internal program. That's not to say that we don't love the idea of trying to preserve many of the features and things we hold dear as a community. It's just that type of program may not be the best means to do that. There might be other tax exemption programs or things we could do or work on to try and achieve those same objectives.
Great, thank you. And I had one more question. When we went to the AWC conference, I got a chance to talk to council members from some other communities, and they said that in their experience in some developments where they did achieve affordable housing, the outcome that they got was that the affordable housing was all from the whole development project was all concentrated in a separate building, so that, I just want to make sure that we're planning to avoid that, because we don't want to have that be the low income segment of a larger development.
So we believe that affordable housing needs to be commingled and mixed throughout the community. However, that does not mean that we might be presented with an opportunity where there was a land donation and where there was funding available to build a building, much like the Presbyterian Church, where it would be concentrated and there would be units, just because that is the opportunity that's in front of us. So that's sort of the hierarchy we'd be looking at, is really trying through development to integrate it throughout the community. However, if we were presented, we want to remove barriers from seeing a not-for-profit builder come in and build something on donated land with matched funding.
Great, thank you very much.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, I was going to provide an update in my report, but I came from the K4C meeting right before this, and I just wanted to give a quick update on some tree information. So there's a lot of discussion, we've had some, and all the cities are having it, around climate resiliency and how sort of the tree retention is changing as we look at mitigations for things like fires, and as the types of trees that are surviving as our climate changes change. So that's another layer of complexity for you guys, but that may be something for us to consider when we talk about tree retention versus planning. While obviously we want tree retention, it may not be the worst thing in certain circumstances to remove trees and plant new ones, different kinds, in a different location, because that's actually going to help with climate resiliency that we're all starting to struggle with, right? So the types of trees that survive, our summers are changing, right? Our summers are much hotter and much drier than they've been in the past. So we don't have any concrete information, but that is work that is ongoing to figure out, can we collectively work on some of the understanding how that's changing and coming up with some recommendations as a collective, instead of every city having to figure it out on their own. So I just wanted to throw that out from a tree perspective.
Yeah, thank you. There was a wonderful, I want to call it a audio book, audio article on KUOW, whatever it is, the other morning about some studies that are happening right now about the difference in the DNA and in the varieties of certain trees. That there are a certain type of fir tree in Northern California and Southern Oregon that we should be considering bringing up, and as we replant trees, be replanting with this variety of fir that is basically being out. What's the right? It's no longer appropriate for that climate zone that they're seeing in Northern California and Southern Oregon, and they're calling it Firmageddon. That there are these trees dying off at this level, and that we need to be starting to think in areas like the Puget Sound about using these varieties of trees for the next 30 to 50 years, and how we plan and integrate plantings of trees.
Yeah, and as we look at tree retention, again, trees make us happy, right? In addition to all the environmental benefits, and we need to be cognizant of, maybe this is an opportunity as we're looking at the town center plans and code on where should those trees be relative to the buildings, right? We know that that some of the recommendations for like fire prevention and mitigation is to have more space between the buildings and the trees. So that might be something to look at as well, right? I think you don't even want to branch within 15 feet. I think if I recall correctly from the Eastside Fire and Rescue recommendations. So that's something for us to consider as well.
And we have identified tentatively, working with the city manager and with his direction, how to fit trees into the 2025 work plan. We believe that is likely to be a topic that we're going to spend some time on because it's something that we really can't avoid talking about as a community.
Yeah, and I think Deputy Mayor Howell brought it up, that the idea of a tree bank, I think, is critical. We're seeing more and more as some of our neighborhoods age, where trees are dying or getting too big for their property, and property owners want to do the right thing, but you can't legitimately replace that big tree with another big tree because it's a problem because it doesn't fit, right? So, they'd be happy to replace it somewhere else if that was an option. So I think that there are a lot of opportunities here for us to still get more trees, but get the right trees in the right places. Thanks.
So if UZDP is not normal, what's the normal, what is that?
Like a site plan review or potentially a development agreement, which is, a little bit different animal. The UZDP is, I think, essentially unique to Sammamish.
Okay.
I think it was created, my impression is it was created as a result of the fact that at the time there were diffuse property owners, right? And they wanted to make sure that there was some cohesiveness about how this all built out. But now that largely the property has been assembled through a primary or JV ownership, and that they're even talking to the neighbors for properties they don't control, that really it's not something that's really necessary anymore. I would say a development agreement with a master plan for how to develop a block of a quadrant of land would be far more effective than a UZDP. The other thing about a UZDP is that in instances when a subdivision is then proposed or required, we go from a type 2 decision, which is a director's decision, up to a type 3 decision at the next step, which is the opposite of the way it should work, really, in logic and thinking about process. So, and a UZDP almost always begets another administrative process after it. So you do a UZDP and then a preliminary subdivision, or a UZDP and then a commercial site development permit. And so it's this multi-step process that just drags it out for a lot longer and presents a lot of risk and unknown to a developer, which is challenging when they're trying to get funding and their funders are looking at this saying there's a lot of risk.
And then the new street and sidewalk standards, obviously sidewalks are going to get cheaper. So is that what we're looking at? Is it like size? What's the standard that's coming, or do you have any idea? I know it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we would look at it, we would develop a system that is specific to the character and development of each street within town center. So in the more urban blocks, you tend to have wider sidewalks, trees, amenities, benches. In other locations where maybe it's more of a residential frontage, you might have a little bit more narrow sidewalks, bigger green strips, tree plantings. So it's very customizable and adaptable. And that also needs to be considered with the relationships of the buildings. Are we talking middle housing? Are we talking urban kind of retail buildings, multi-story, so that the street and development really work as one to achieve the outcomes.
Great, that's super helpful. And I like that we can change things to what's built. So awesome. Council, anything else for them? Great. Well, thank you. I'm sure you'll be sending us stuff. Transmitting, yeah.
Nothing to transmit on this yet.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
But January 2025 is when, or some decisions or extra.
Yeah, so we're going to continue to work with the Planning Commission on this and keep you updated, and likely be back this fall with some points for direction.
Hi. So right now, Framework is talking with DKS, our transportation consultant, because they do have a role in this project and the analysis that needs to be done. And so once they develop the scope for DKS, that will feed into our project timeline, and that will help us solidify our revised project timeline. But as of right now, we will be back on October 1st for the joint meeting. And the plan is after that, it would go back to the Planning Commission for their review, and then we anticipate coming to City Council in January for your review. This could all change slightly pending the outcome of that conversation.
Great. Well, thank you. Enjoy your break from us. Yeah.
We'll be here, but yeah, have a great
from
end
us,
of July and August.
Yeah, there you go. All right, thank you. Okay, I think we're going to make it before 10 p.m. So, Michelle, hello. So this is discussing the resolution for the racial equity commitment and vision.
Yes. Can you all hear me all right?
It's all good.
Great. So good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. My name is Michelle Arab, and I'm one of the co-leadership liaisons for the racial equity team. On behalf of the entire team, I'm pleased to be here tonight to present the resolution adopting Sammamish's racial equity commitment and vision statement. Last week at your study session, the full group presented our work and the proposed document. We appreciated the council's insightful questions and discussion. After the meeting, the racial equity team discussed and agreed that it would be of value to add a subtitle to the document based on the feedback from council. The title and subtitle now read, Racial Equity Commitment and Vision, Ensuring Everyone in Sammamish Can Grow, Excel, and Thrive. We are here tonight to ask the council to approve the resolution adopting the city's racial equity commitment and vision. Members of the team are here online and in the room to answer any of your questions. On behalf of the racial equity team, we thank the council for your leadership on this important issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you for, everyone on the team to incorporate that. Council, do you have any questions or would anyone like to make a motion for this resolution? Go for it.
If there are no questions, okay, just making sure that that we resolve to adopt a racial equity and commitment and vision plan, which is R2024-1061.
Second. All right, moved and seconded. Would you like to speak to that?
No, I think we've done a pretty ample job of speaking to it. I'm delighted that you've brought this forward. Thank you so much.
Awesome. All right, council, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you, Michelle and Rachel. Tell everyone thank you. I'm sure they're watching. Who else is? Oh, and Scott? Krista. Oh, Krista. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks, Krista. Great. All right, Michelle, now you can go to bed, probably. Thank you so much. Okay, Scott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of quick items. Just a reminder, as you'd already mentioned, council will be taking a recess through the month of August, so there will be no official council meetings. Obviously, the building will be open, staff will be here, but we will reconvene in early September on the first Tuesday in September. I wanted to highlight that we are about to start our budget outreach, and our efforts start tomorrow. As you know, we've been overhauling the budget to get a better budget to actual expenses and developing the city's first citywide capital improvement program, or CIP. We've already received a great deal of information on our community's fiscal priorities from the community survey that was completed earlier this spring. Now we're going to go to the community by asking our residents how they would prioritize capital investments. Because we're all pulling together the first citywide CIP, we want to focus our efforts on hearing from the community where these capital dollars should go so we can ensure the CIP reflects community goals. You'll see staff at upcoming farmers markets starting tomorrow, and we'll be releasing a survey tomorrow that mirrors the outreach we're conducting at the farmers markets. So please be sure to stop by and help share your capital investment priorities with our staff at the farmers markets throughout the summer and into the fall, on and off. So looking forward to that. I also want to remind the community about National Night Out, Tuesday, August 6th. We've had a number of folks register their event, and we would encourage more to come. The leadership team, council, and our police and fire will be out and about, so we'd love to come visit your neighborhood and chat with folks where you live as opposed to coming to City Hall. And one last reminder, since this is our last meeting before the event, tonight's event was fantastic. We saw some former council members and city leaders and staff, and it was great to see everyone. Really excited for the event on August 16th, our official Jubilee event from 5 to 9 p.m. Out here on the City Hall Plaza. We're very excited. I'd like to take a moment to thank the team that has been working on this, that's pulling this all together. It's been a lot of work, but I think it's going to accumulate in a wonderful event. So encourage the community to come out and join us. We're looking forward to seeing you all there. With that, Mayor, back to you.
Great, thank you. Council, does anyone have anything? Councilmember Gupta.
We have a Kokanee Work Group meeting July 24th, so I will send, or Councilmember Trina and I will send meeting materials out as they become available.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we had a King County Cities Climate Collaboration elected official work session meeting today. That is a mouthful. That's why we call it K4C. It was very informative. We did get a glimpse into some preliminary data that we are starting to see an impact from the policies and the work that we've been doing. We do know, as Executive Constantine said, we're starting to bend the curve, but it is too slow and not enough, so more efforts are going to be needed. We had a great presentation on the Climate Commitment Act and the impacts on local action. Once I get that presentation, I will certainly share it with everyone. Just some really high-level information around how the combination of the policies and then the basically the cap and invest system works, and how it really targets the largest emitters, not the small, mom and pop, not the small residential or small businesses, and really provides the funding, particularly for the most impacted communities and the communities that have historically not been necessarily taken care of from an environmental impact. So again, I'll provide some additional information on that, but it was incredibly insightful. We then did a little bit of a workshop around, what would success look like to us, what would some of the achievements be, and what are some of the big concerns. And that's where, as I talked about, the trees and we talked a little bit about climate mitigation, right? In addition to trying to prevent climate change, some of it is already happening, and so what should we be doing to mitigate that, and some climate resiliency work. So again, hopefully we'll get a summary of that and I can share that out, but a lot of great work happening. We now have 21 cities, the Port and King County are all signed on to these commitments, so that was very exciting. And then I did want to just share that we recently in our city, we fell victim to hate graffiti again. We had that happen a few years ago. And certainly recent events around the country show that hate and anger and intolerance are on the rise. I think, we all want to reassure our community that hate, intolerance, violence, bullying, and intimidation of any kind have no place in our community, and they shouldn't be normalized. I was really proud of this council, of all of us, really coming together in response when intolerance was expressed in an inappropriate way right here in these chambers. And we as a council also, I'm very proud that we passed a code of conduct and a code of ethics, and we have a statement in there that says, showing no tolerance for intimidation or bullying. So I know that you are all incredibly steadfast, and again, I'm very proud to serve with a group like you who are so strong in standing up and not accepting any of that. I want to thank Plateaupians for Peace and all of the community members who came out and literally turned symbols of hate and intimidation into literal rainbows and unicorns. It was quite a sight to see, and again made me proud of the rest of our community. But I call again on my fellow council members and all of our community members to stand up and to speak out and to let everyone know that those types of behaviors are just never, ever acceptable, and that we just won't tolerate. Hate has no place in any community, and certainly not here in Sammamish. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Lamb?
I really appreciate that, Councilmember Stewart. I have a Board of Health meeting tomorrow, which unfortunately I won't be able to attend because I'll be traveling. I have a Solid Waste Committee on Friday, which I will be attending, and I'll get that agenda out to everybody.
Councilmember O'Farrell?
Just quickly, I will be attending the RIA 8 meeting on Thursday, so that you guys know what comes with that meeting. And it's actually in person in Redmond City Hall for a change, because it's usually on Zoom. So that's very exciting.
All right, seeing no one else, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
Yeah. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you, everybody. And thank you to staff for this evening.